What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, everyone outside and in between? This is SCP CRMP, aka Lack of Lepers. Thanks for joining us on our channel, the SCP Meta on the Twitch. Boy, I've missed you guys and gals. Have you missed me? It's been a few days. Had a out-of-town visit. That was a funeral, so you know, not great, but as fun as it could be. I got a rowdy family. So I want to, first of all, apologize for starting an hour or so early. We're actually an hour and 15 minutes early, starting this from the time that I announced previously that we would. But the time slot opened up for me, and I have just absolutely got to take advantage of that. If I can get done with this an hour earlier, good, because I got to catch up on some sleep after this very, very long week. So let's get right into it. Of course, this is our gauntlet style, 3-hour, typically long show where we go through all of the SCP articles that were written this week. And we talk about them each in detail, some others, some more than others, depending upon what we think of them. And typically we'll give a synopsis, and then I'll say a few things about it, of course, just to share my ideas. So if you're watching, if you have any commentary on these articles from this week, do not be shy. Let me know what you think of them. In fact, if you like doing this, maybe you can, send me a DM and I'll give you a few of these per week. You can help a brother out, because this is a lot of hard work, but hard work is happy work, and I love doing this. So it is nice to be back. Thank you very, very much for joining. And let's get started, because we have a good number of articles to get through this week. I think we're up to about 30, and these will end on the 12th, so just a week's worth again. So this is a little higher than average this week. We're still getting, as you can see here, a large influx of international articles, and I was made aware that this is due to the fact that recently the English staff made it explicit, where it was kind of unstated before, that the international translators could post, directly to the English wiki. They didn't have to do it in some other way. So now we have a ton of international articles showing up on the feed, which of course has coincided with me starting this project, and so that obviously doubles our work. So we're going to try to get through all of these in a timely fashion today. If an article is not interesting to me, basically I'll just try to keep it pretty short, just in the interest of time. Okay, so having said that, I got my water with me, big old gulp, and let's get started. So we started this week on the 6th of May. We went through the 12th. And I do apologize if you're catching this ex post facto and you're angry that I started it an hour early. I do apologize. But I do know also that this will be right up after this ends, and you are free to watch the first portion that you missed. Okay, so let's start it off. So this is our first article for this week. This is SCP-CN666. This is an international branch. There's actually two China branches. One is CN, the other is, I think, ZH, and that's the traditional Chinese branch. I'm not too sure why exactly the differences are there. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you, what the difference is, but we do seem to get a fair number from both of these. So this first one is from the newer Chinese branch, and let me see if I can get something working here. You guys all remember Brian, I'm sure. Maybe Brian would like to join us. So Brian, why don't you kind of pick up for us here and just let us know a little bit about what this SCP-CN666, oh my, what a daunting name. Tell us a little bit about that if you don't mind.
A Foundation employee who anomalously wants to break his dietary restrictions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember this now. So this is, I would say, a fairly advanced article. The containment procedures, let's just get into it. The containment procedures are elaborate, as you can see. We've got a few paragraphs here, but they're not too dense as to disengage the reader or bog the article down too much. This flows relatively smoothly. There are some spacing issues in here, some typical translation imperfections, and polish discrepancies. For example, we could skip ahead to the dialogue in the interview. Some of this is not really quite polished very well. But this really low rate frequency, and there's an extremely sharp clinical tone otherwise to this article. So if you're a fan of clinical tone, obviously I highly recommend you check this article out. And again, that is keeping in mind this is a translation, so somebody has done twice the work to get the clinical tone as good as it is here. So I would say just overall first impressions of this, it's an excellent read, simply due to the clinical excellence here alone. I think that's worth a read. The shortcomings of this article are that the central anomaly, which amounts to basically irrational behavior, at least at first. It kind of expands on that, but it's kind of a slow start, and you're not quite sure why this is being considered anomalous until much later in the article. Perhaps the individual is psychotic. What's happening here is there's an individual, this Agent Chang here. He feels compelled to break the rules that are being placed upon him, and that the article also mentions are contrary to a cultural morality. And so doesn't really recall doing or attempting this sort of rebellion against the rules for him. But so far, and particularly in the description, it's really a far cry from anything anomalous. It takes really a supplemental info hazard that we see a little later on, and a conjugate conceptual tampering with something mysterious, first of all called, comes up over and over and over again in this article. Ash's foot, which is not explained. It's just sort of thrown in there. And very, very interestingly not explained. And you're left scratching your head as to if that's a real thing. And that's exactly what the article wants you to do. So it is a step ahead of you, intelligence-wise. And that was a very enjoyable thing to see. It meshes a really creepy moral backdrop with the eating habits of this Agent Chang, and also deals heavily in gaslighting. It also harps strongly on group confirmation. That's sort of a theme here, however insane that might become or be. There's an unspoken framing device that you may have hoped for, because once again, this is not really an anomaly proper in the description of things. It really takes the framing device of this article to actually make it anomalous. So it's kind of unspoken. It shows up at the end. Part of it is, for some reason, the Foundation considers dietary deviations as bad as procedure Montauk, which is something. Really is explained in the interview. Really is the capstone of this article, brings everything together. And I love it when an article does this. When an article starts off somewhat confusing and seemingly a little disappointing, just out of the gate. But it's doing so intentionally. It's almost doing so just to trap you in the assumption that it doesn't know what it's doing. And then something like this at the end. Let's see if we can actually find it. Montauk. Yeah. There it is mentioned. I think there's like an important line in this dialogue that kind of captures, I think, what this article is about. And here it is. So Agent Chang, he's sort of grappling with the fact that he's being considered as an anomaly. He kind of empathizes with the reader in that he's not sure why he should be an anomaly. And so then there's this line. I'll read this. Actually, Brian, why don't you read this for me in the interest of saving my voice slightly?
Agent Cheng, so the whole of society agreed on a moral principle aimed only at me? How could a moral principle be so specific? Where is your anti-cognito training now? Can't you see such an obvious problem?
Right, so that kind of finally takes the absurdity of this and crystallizes it for everybody. And then they actually get... This is where the article just like bursts into the holy shit stratosphere, is when they finally talk about what the hell Ash's foot is. So at the very end of this, the Agent Ching is like, okay, so at least enlighten me as to what Asha foot is. And Dr. Hong replies, Asha's foot is the finite dance that casts to the world's infinite realm, walking together with unbroken me in 86,450,000 worlds, sending forth the smell of rosy frankincense that belonged to a moonlighted former library. Of course, that a reference to 2602 by Scantron. And it goes on like this. So it just at the final moment, it's almost like a bad dream where like things are out of place and the logic isn't quite right. And then at some point in the dream, it just gets like, it drops all pretense of making sense. That's kind of what this does here. It does it at a beautiful pace. A little hot on the mic there, sorry. This is just a fantastic article. In fact, this is so good that I actually do want Brian to read this just because it's just crazy. And let me take out these footnote numbers so it's a little smoother. Just listen to this.
Dr. Hong, Ash's foot is the finite dance that casts to the world's infinite realm, walking together with an unbroken mean 86,450,000 worlds, sending forth the smell of rosy frankincense that belonged to a moonlighted former library, heard and one knows the gospel of four-legged doomsday fish. Oh holy great maiden's mother's granny praises the baptism of spider's kiss, that it provides thee, Cheng, all nourishment especially water that is not contained in broccoli. Do you remember now?
Agent Cheng sighs. I don't know. I'm totally insane, he says. So the gaslighting is complete. And of course the reader is just a little bit better off than this character, but not by much. And so, once again, these footnotes, they reference sort of insight things. I think they're well placed. I think 2602 is a nice shout out for just how crazy this is. There's another CN article that is shouted out. And actually, we also get a reference to milk. So maybe this would have the phantom milk tag. So that's pretty cool. So the final addendum here, just right here, it leans really, really deliciously on the, it's not me, it's the children who are wrong, sort of gaslighting effect. I think it's a crying shame that this doesn't have more upvotes. I think when I read this, it was 15, and so in almost a week, it's only gotten 2 more. But this is an incredibly advanced article, a very, very good showing from not only the international side of the community, but also the Chinese. But this is just a fantastic article. It's one of the best of this week, so it's a heck of a thing to start off with. But it's just a really, really, really well-constructed, very well-designed article. If this was architecture, it would be stunning from both the inside and outside. So excellent job to this author. This is just a tremendously good article, in my opinion, so check that out. All right, moving on. So we're still in the international deluge here, and so we've got an article that is apparently from the Ukrainian branch. That's UA, but it's also an X, so that's interesting. We got a lot of designations going on here, and as the author later states, this is the only EX, I think, from the Ukrainian branch. So let's take a quick look at this. I'll let you kind of just peruse this for a second. So this article is a play, as you might have been able to tell. It's really a play on the current, ongoing, and of course past Russia-Ukrainian war, having the designation here previously in RU, as you can see here, and now it has been changed to be designated as Ukrainian branch. So, this is actually set in a past conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And the anomaly is what you see in this picture. It's maybe hard to see, but it's this yellow armband, and there's on the helmet, on the arms, on the backpacks. They're sort of all over the picture here, and so that's the anomaly. It's an armband, or really an insignia, that seemingly raises combat prowess in a number of ways. There are some thaumaturgical origins to this anomaly, although more modern interpretations in universe of the anomaly question whether or not it's simply experimental pharmaceuticals embedded in the armbands, making it seem like thaumaturgy. But highlights in this include a passage from it's like some kind of like foreign culture. I can't remember which one it is. Here it is. Brian, why don't you say that for me so I don't embarrass myself?
Sarmatian.
Sarmatian, thank you. So there's a Sarmatian passage here that I think is a real highlight of the article. So it includes this Sarmatian detachment that uses an antiquated version of this presumed anomaly. So it enacts this sort of thaumaturgical ritual It has some excellent poetic language in here, and gets, perhaps appropriately, very barbaric in its imagery. And in fact, there are portions of this that are not really that easy to read, but the author does a fine job of setting that at a little bit of a distance through the tone that is kept throughout here pretty well. So the article does not give a non-ambiguous conclusion over whether this is an anomaly or not, or simply just the sort of placebo-affected morale of the Ukrainian troops. So you're sort of like Michael Jordan, Space Jam, Space Jam secret stuff kind of drink. You might remember that from that movie. That's kind of what's happening here. It's a decent read. It's not too long. I don't think it ever gets too effective. The anomaly starts off a little obtuse, and it never really centralizes itself into something more profound or interesting. So it's sort of in the no-vote territory. Nothing particularly bad, nothing particularly wrong, but really nothing terribly impressive either. Like I said, I think the highlight is clearly this passage. It doesn't really play a whole lot into the actual article. It's sort of ornamental. But, this is at a +6. I think that's a fair rating for this. It clearly is topical. So obviously you're going to get, probably a decent amount of polemicization on this, even though we're in the SCP Wiki itself. So, but I would encourage you to read this. It's certainly interesting in that, once again, as the author says, it's the only EX from the Ukrainian branch currently, and this is an interesting little pivot that's done. I think a lot is said in this interesting little pivot away from it being an RU to a Ukrainian. And I'm actually not even sure if this is IRL or if this is just in universe. So either way, I think it's very interesting. It's probably worth a read if you have some extra time. But it certainly isn't anything that you're going to miss if you decide not to go back and check it out, I think. All right. Next one is SCP 6359. So let me get Brian to synopsize this for us real quick.
A film that anomalously casts known actors, about a patriotic fervor for nostalgic Americana with a bit of a coded message.
Right, that's a good way to put this. So to borrow a comment left in the discussion, the anomalous effects of this are that any American who watches it starts to unconditionally hate America, and any European who watches it goes into a rage. The researchers on this anomaly are intentionally keeping this fact obscured in the main documentation because they don't want people to know that this film is actually being used to sort of brainwash people against America and anything Americana, for example. So there's a couple of complexities going on here. It's not just a one-dimensional anomaly. You've got some meta or intra-meta play with the documentation and the in-universe setting of that. This is really a long-last collaboration between two sort of groups of interest, not really groups, but sort of like pseudo-groups of interest, pseudo-canons. And that is Tapered Software. I think I'm saying that right. Let's just get Brian to say it, so if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, I can pin it on him.
Tapered Software.
Yeah, Tapered Software. And another very obvious mashup with that, which is the Vikander Need Technical Media. And of course, this is something that's Grigory Karpin, I think, made this. And then Tapered, I think was made by Dave Ufool. But we read a recent Tapered Software. That was the recommendation for a few weeks ago, where it was the Seinfeld SCP, where George Costanza goes kind of insane. And that was just, like I said, that was the recommendation of the week. That was an excellent article. So Tapered is interesting. I think it just sort of naturally begged and beckoned a sort of collaboration in an article with this Vikander Need Technical Media. So that's great to see. This is really sort of one of those obvious things that some author finally catches, and finally does. And of course, every other author goes, of course, duh. So in this article, the Tapered Software Corporation is the one that produces this video, and the VNeed distributes it. This has a humorous charm that I think is fitting and really does justice to Totley's sort of frenzied misspellings and poor attempts at cultural appropriation, as well as its anomalous control of existing American actors, which I think is probably the most low-key but the most intriguing part of this anomaly, where the movie will cast known American actors, and of course the American actors don't have any memory of the recording or anything like this. So I think the humor here starts off well understated, with things like all actors being credited as American, just that, and all musical selections are attributed to John Philip Sosa, who, if you don't know, is a famous American nationalist composer who I think wrote the national anthem. I might be wrong about that, but one of those hefty Americana, fight songs. Basically, is John Philip Sosa is a very famous composer, American, who did that. So in this, it's funny. The music is people you might expect, but Neil Young is in there. John Philip Sosa is too. So I thought that was nice. And then as you kind of get into it, you get these little selected segments. So what happens is basically just like a Totley thing might be, this video, I think is a DVD, and it's just anomalously long. The DVD format shouldn't be able to hold a video of this size, and it's just ridiculously long. I can't remember how many hours it says in here. 587 hours and some change. So obviously there's a lot of weird things going on with this, and then basically in here are selected segments from the movie, and basically everyone starts with a sort of a title screen here, and the Foundation is explaining what is going on in each and kind of how it has to do with the overall themes of Americana. So once again, starting off here, I think the humor is understated. I think it's also tasteful commentary on America's world policing, in that the film depicts Americans entering a new foreign country via rocket-propelled parachutes labeled Army, and then attempt to enforce some supposed element of American culture or politics on the locals. So, it starts off with this sort of like below the belt, sort of low-hanging fruit, kind of like the typical Twitter, sort of commentary on America, sort of dancing into cringe leftism. So it kind of starts off very charming. For example, these first like 2 or 3 segments are hilarious. The humor here is very mature and advanced. But as you can see, we get more and more and more and more and more. And so at about the after about 2 of these segments, really about the third, I think it sort of starts to slow down, and it's almost the same joke over and over and over again, just sort of rotated in different angles in this light. But it's basically all boils down to America bad. And the person who wrote this very poorly disguises their political bias, I think. Once again, I think this would be a more effective article if the author could have found some sort of restraint in doing so, because it's less about political differences. That's really what this is not about. It's more about just overbaking your own personal commentary, political commentary, into an SCP article. That's really what this is. So let me say that again in a different way. I don't particularly agree with the sorts of philosophies and political philosophies and commentary that are expressed in this SCP. Surprise, surprise. No one is surprised by that. But that's not really why I fault the article. What really I fault the article for is just how overhanded and heavy-handed it plays that. So, for example, if someone was making this article and it was actually everything that I agree with politically, I still would feel the same way about it. And the reason is because even if it's the stances that I agree with, it's just there's a part of this that just gets way too hackneyed way too quickly, and it just seems a little preachy. And so it's that portion of it that makes this article really start to suffer. Like I said, probably about the third entry here. I think everything before is pretty good, although I think that this section here, which is a reproduction of what's on the back of the DVD case, I think also gets a little overcooked. I think it gets a little burnt We kind of get the gist of this after the first few examples of these. I think they cease to get entertaining very quickly in here, just because it's the same note played over and over again. And it's not just the same note that's played over and over again. It's the same note that's just banged over and over and over again. So this article certainly has some flaws. I think this would have been better done with the smaller sample, or a little bit of this and maybe synopsizing the rest from the point of the foundation. That might work a little better than this does. And then the individual cultural references here are not to really justify, I think, the tangle that the article gets itself into. And of course, the tangle being that the author desperately wants you to understand their political position, but also why they think people who don't have their political position are incorrect. And so I think it takes these little things here and there, the Middle East, Space Force, all these kinds of things, and tries to sort of form sort of a patchwork mosaic argument for why America is bad. But it just comes off as, once again, sort of like Twitter level ramblings almost. So, the anomaly, I think, borrows way too heavily from South Park's sort of take on this, the world police, with a painful amount of bias. So, South Park at least mixes it a little bit. You have satire really of a lot of different people. Satire for all, ridicule for all is sort of the South Park's thing. But this just takes the bias and just sends it up to the top floor. I mean, it gets a little ridiculous, actually, very quickly. Once again, it's not so much the stench of the overt political commentary. It's just that there's a gross unevenness with putting such commentary in the mouth of, let's say, the characters, the film, things like that. So basically what this amounts to ultimately is a conga line of example segments that each have less and less charm than the one previously. We have low-hanging shots, low-hanging fruit regarding anti-American cultural criticism, barbs that the author clearly thinks will please the crowd indefatigably. But it's almost like a comedian who thinks that a stream of low-effort jokes will keep the audience laughing purely based on stereotypical expectations. There's a lot of pot shots here at like alt-right conspiracy thinking, such as flat earthism, a fake moon landing, which is actually the first of two articles we'll see this week that deal with moon landing conspiracies. And finally, things like chemtrails. So, I mean, you're really straw-manning this side. This kind of reminds me of DJ Cactus's, I think it's SCP 3625, I think is what it is. But that's basically an SCP where that author came out and felt as though they needed to provide the alt-right with their caricature of them and own them. And of course, that was hilarious, a hilarious attempt. And so that's kind of the vibe that this has. It's sort of like picks on a midget and thinks itself big. That's kind of what this does. So it dangerously pushes the charm of Totley into Dado territory. And I'm not talking about early Dado. I'm talking about late Dado, where Dado gets politicized and basically Dado goes woke. If you haven't read that article, so that's kind of dangerous. This is basically wokeism. Is basically what we're seeing here in this article. Trying to come off as original and charming and funny, and it is. Don't get me wrong. There's a ton of charm, and it's just absolutely hilarious, especially up here. But like I said, it's just that one note over and over and over and over again. I mean, this is a perfect example of what happens in this whole article. This little quote box is a microcosm. That's basically all it is, and it gets very tiring after a while. I think that's a dangerous thing to do for Totley, which really hasn't been political as far as I understand before this. It sort of kills the charisma, sort of disconnects it. And it really, like I said, comes off as a political diatribe that the author tries to infuse with some sugar to make the medicine go down. It's very clear that the author's ultimate goal is not just to laugh at the people who they would think are incorrect politically, but it's to let you know what they think of the situation so that you can think like what they think. So this kind of reads like a church service of wokeism, cringe leftism kind of thing. And just to be clear, this is the easiest type of article to write on the SCP Wiki. That should be said and understood. It's the easiest kind of article to write. All you have to do is tout left-leaning shock jock platitudes to this demographic of the voting class on SCP, and you know your article is going to be applauded by the religion there. So if you're a liberal and you like Totley, you're going to like this article quite a lot. Like I said before, the two, sort of Totley and the VK, they were bound to be joined. And I think the author even notes this. So speaking of the author, I was kind of charmed by the author. The author has a very, very good vocabulary. I love the word obverse in here. It's just a tip-off that the author is intelligent. No one's questioning whether or not this author is intelligent. This author certainly has a big brain and knows how to use it. But just very, very quickly, that brain seems to be sort of navel-gazing at itself, and this quickly loses and sours whatever good components it has going for it. So I was a little concerned as to who this might be, and my worries were confirmed when I looked at who wrote it, and it's Harry Blank, who probably, in my opinion, is probably the most insufferable person on the SCP Wiki in this day and age. He sort of always puts off this level of self-centeredness and snark. So I wasn't really surprised when I saw this was this author. I could go on about Harry Blank, but I guess this isn't the place for it. But anyway, like I said, this is just basically somebody almost cheat coding the system here, because if you want to play this game, no one should be applauded for this. This is the easiest thing you could possibly write, because basically all you have to do is bash America, on the SCP Wiki, and it's an auto success. It's an auto banger. So shame on Harry Blank for basically making his own, taking the easiest shot possible. No one's impressed by this. So it's a perfect example, I think, this article, of the need for the separation of containment fiction and state, which is really my motto, is separation of confic and state. This sort of boundless partisanship sort of abscesses the genre to just one sort of reader and, influential participant, someone like Harry Blank. So, it's a good thing that most of the wiki isn't like this, because if all articles on the SCP Wiki were like this, it would have gone woke for sure, and probably broke after that very quickly. So, do I recommend this article? Yeah, I do. Like I said, it's really clever. If you happen to be, in agreement with the political positioning here, you're going to love this article. It's basically just a comedian's show. Maybe, like I said, even if I agreed with this, I'd still have the same issues that I have with it. It's just a little overdone. But just see how far you can get through it. Maybe you'll get through the whole thing. It is absolutely funny. But once again, it just overstays its welcome by quite a lot, I think. Hey, give me 1 second here. Oh yeah. We are gonna have to take a few breaks in here. Maybe at the hour mark or hour and a half mark, because my brain, starts to shut down very quickly after all this. And if you think this is bad, you should see me reading these things. All right, the next one. Let's move on. So 6128. I almost didn't do this one because, as you can see, the rating is pretty low. But last week, I think it was last week, I skipped one because it looked like I assumed it was going to be deleted, and so I didn't cover it, and it actually didn't get deleted, so I felt a little bad about that. So I went ahead and covered this one too. This is SCP-6128, and this is I'll just not spend a whole lot of time on this, but it's a short article I think it's worth a read, if only to see what it does wrong. I think its description is pretty interesting. It sort of has a Series 1, Series 2 vibe to it. And then the addendum is really where it, I think, fumbles. Basically, it takes some interesting ingredients and then doesn't really do a lot with them. And if you read the title of this article, which is The Platypus Magnet, that makes a lot of sense. It's sort of like the salsa hammer, sort of just, thing that is a thing, doing a thing, played very flatly and very tersely. Clearly doesn't have the community charm that Salsa Hammer had, but I would put this in the same category as that, which is that basically it's almost like it should be an anomalous item, and I have my own reasons for why something like the Salsa Hammer succeeded when something like this doesn't, but even when they're basically the same thing. But so I would recommend a read just because it's -5. Maybe you could help bump it up if you do like it, but I think that's a fair rating here. It just kind of builds you up, and then it asks you out on the date, and then arranges a time, and then makes reservations, and then just doesn't show up, and so you're kind of like, what the fuck? So, all right, next one real quick. SCP-208-DE. So DE is German, so that's the German branch. So let us get Brian to tell us a little bit about this one. What do you think, Brian?
A non-Euclidean Gork hospital designed to provide health services to those afflicted with anomalies, but there is a hidden surveillance purpose to the building that the Foundation sniffs out, not without difficulty, due to the Gork's clever reasons for using the zone it is located in. According to a doctor there, they treat memetic pathogens, curses, metaphysical parasites, extraterrestrial viruses. Just to give a few examples.
Yeah, so when Brian says GOC, he's talking about the GOC. So this is the GOC hospital. It was really set up to sort of be like a humanitarian aid that's given to anyone who's afflicted with an anomaly, who needs medical attention but of an anomalous nature. And so it sets itself up in this sort of like sort of like neutral waters kind of thing. And so the Foundation notices this, and the article was about the Foundation looking into this hospital. And so I think there's some things about this article that are a little off. I have no idea what Argus is. That's obviously an esoteric class, and there's no footnote that helps me out there. So that portion of it is kind of lost. I feel like this is a really good idea for Anomaly. It's just taking something very realistic, and saying, okay, so who's going to help treat the victims of anomalies? Like, how does that work? Well, this is a perfect, hospital-shaped hole in the conceptual landscape of writing for the SCP Wiki and for containment fiction in general. So I think it was a really good idea, but it's kind of given the most garden variety treatment. For example, we have this, it's a non-Euclidean space in the hospital, and it goes into a little bit about how it is non-Euclidean, and it'll talk about how rooms change. I'm reading now, the internal structure changes at irregular levels, altering the position of corridors, the furniture of the rooms. So I don't really think that's necessary. I mean, I guess you have to make it anomalous somehow, and so that sort of seems to be like, once again, like the easiest target. Let's just reach into, the prepackaged bag of ready, anomaly reasons, and let's make it that. So, I think it's a good idea, but it's really not given the kind of treatment that I think it probably deserves, just for the quality that it is. So it's not like that other non-Euclidean SCP we read a few weeks ago, which was 6831, where the minimalism of the non-Euclidean space is the point, and you really take a new cavity of that idea that no one has explored yet. Instead, it's sort of like just thrown in. It's almost like a prepackaged spice mix, where you just throw it on everything, and it comes ready, and it makes everything taste like that one thing. So... But there are still redeeming things about this article, which looks really long if you get all of these collapsibles, but they're all relatively short. So, but in addition to that, there's some really cool terminology going on here. So, pretermemetically, I thought was really, really cool. This is information that is selectively memetic or anti-memetic, depending upon the recipient or the circumstances. I thought that was pretty impressive of a term to use there. So I hope to see that used more. I haven't seen that before. I'm not saying that this person was the originator of it, but that's pretty cool. And also the use of Eve radiation, I think was used in here. I can't find it at the moment, but very interesting use of Eve's radiation. Let's see, what else? I think the dialogue here, getting to this interview, is very smooth. It's well written, once again, especially for a translation article. And then the addenda down here do a great job of telling the story and having solid moments to contribute to this experience. For example, of the Foundation agents walking around the hospital and speaking with the staff. This is really cool. This is one of the collapsibles here. Reconstructed form is sort of the digital version of one of the forms that you fill out, let's say when you go to your doctor at the clinic. So this is just really nicely played. I think it really sets it more believably and realistically in here. But there's another one, table of ailments that are treated by the staff here. For example, this one right here, Catholic exorcism was one for a Tartarus class anomaly. They get somebody who has a cold and they just dismiss him because it's a waste of time. It's not anomalous. So, yeah, and once again, the addenda are numerous, but they're not long. So I think all in all, this is a really, really good article. It plays with real-world sentiments at the complicated intersection of humanitarian aid and ulterior motives. Because as you get into this article, you quickly realize, along with the Foundation, that the GOC is not simply trying to be, as you might expect, just do-gooders here. So there's a satisfying political tone that I think is done right. This is an extreme contrast to the immediately previous article of America, America, fuck yeah. And this is really how you should take a political stance and treat it, in a mature fashion, as opposed to somebody whose emotional maturity was arrested shortly after getting, let's say, out of high school. So there's a stark realism to this that finds a way to make the potentially drab subject matter somehow sparkle and shine enough to get you through the read and happy that you did it. So I think it's an excellent article. I think it's woefully underrated at 11. Of course, the article does have flaws. I would love to see this explained. I would love to see a little bit more imaginative and inventive of a way to get this thing anomalous besides it just being in an anomalous space. So, but besides from that, I think this is definitely worth your time. Like I said, it's not really that long, so definitely do that. Okay, next one, we are still on an international tear. So this is 825 KO, and so let's get Brian to tell us, as we look at this, just a little bit about what it is.
A very clever 3-act format screw that turns the document into an advertisements for an anomalous establishment. It lets the customer know where the fish is sourced from, bad talks its competitors, and even gives itself a good rating. The anomaly is the food product itself. Yeah,
so this is the prose in this article is fantastic. It makes me really, really want to eat sushi. So it's got great descriptors here for the sashimi, which are, of course, advertisements for this thing in universe. Words like tender, opulent, melt in your mouth. The person writing this is doing a very good job of describing the actual sushi to the point where I would like to eat some after reading this. So that's something to notice and to praise, because that's hard to do, to get people to want. Yeah, that's really what advertising is. So. Marketing sort of composition. So good job with that. The addenda are researchers' Yelp-style reviews of the various dish offerings, complete with like owner coming in and thanking them, or talking to them about if their visit didn't go right. And then, of course, as you go down, the addenda get a little more involved, and you get down here and we start to get some interesting red text And it's really understated. You have to sort of keep track of the names to figure this out. But some very strange things happen, like the owner of the first establishment that we're introduced to somehow becomes the site director, who was previously directing it. He becomes the director of the site of the team that was previously investigating it. So yeah, it's a little confusing. There are just small areas of non-polish, the typical translation woes with respect to clinical tone, and of course things like spacing, as you can see there, just small stuff, very fixable. But I would say that on the whole, this is a pretty difficult article to understand. I think the concept, this is a high concept article. We'll get to another article this week that bills itself as a high concept article that I don't think was. But this one is a high concept article. You really go through it, and it's kind of hard to follow. You would really probably have to read this numerous times and try to keep a very tight grip on the logic here to puzzle this out. But the translator does give a nice description of what's going on in the comments. So if you find yourself reading this and you're not sure, it's no big deal. Just go look in here and see what they have to say. There it is, show description. It kind of gives you the 3-act right here. So, and it's totally enjoyable once you kind of understand what goes on. If you have to do that to enjoy the article, I think you should. I think 22 is, it's good for international attention. I think it's way better than that. I think this is way better than most EN articles coming out these days. So kudos to this. And the Korean branch is on fire, by the way. The Korean branch is probably my favorite. They do just consistently good things. So I'm not sure if these are like new or old articles that are just coming on because they've opened the floodgates to translations or whatnot. But the Korean branch has some real good stuff, and this is definitely one of them. Definitely worth a look. I guarantee you, it's unlike anything you've seen recently. It's got great and completely in-universe justified uses of infohazardous and mimetic phenomena, which is a hard thing to do as a difficult ingredient to make work, I think. And actually, this article, just a bit of trivia, was the winner of a contest on the Korea branch, the bi-monthly 2020 August contest. So this is a little older of an article, but it's totally worth your time, and very happy to see it on the English branch to get some more exposure. All right, 227 French. We'll do maybe 4 more of these and then take a little bit of a break, a little bit of an intermission. And because we're making pretty good time here, I think, overall. All right, Brian, tell us about this one. Interesting picture we have here, don't we?
A horoscope photo booth that is habit forming. The final collapsible introduces the original as a false front document, and details the more sinister elements of the machine.
So as the picture sort of shows right off the bat, really sets the tone here. It's a black and white photo of a very old piece of technology, but one that's still familiar because we still have things like this today with the photo booths, that you can go get your pictures taken. And so this is a nice mix of antiquated technology with sort of otherworldly sophistication, such as the no power source needed treatment, reaction to spoken words despite no audio receiver type of thing, and even some time play. So we get moments in this where the machine can sort of predict people's futures and fully explain their pasts, with obviously questions as to how they know this information left unanswered. So there are tones of modern day, technocultural critique as an ultimately stupefying and destructive mechanism. So it uses these older sort of technologies to sort of comment, I think, on modern day stuff. So a good example of this, just to kind of demonstrate what I mean, is this sentence right here. And it says, the longer a subject is exposed to this anomaly, the more extreme this behavior will come, and the subject's mental health will irreversibly degrade. So that sounds like metacritique to me, just for technologies that we come across most of our times. And maybe that's just me that thinks that, but I certainly think it's pretty pointed of a statement. There are unfortunate grammatical issues in this, such as missed capitalizations, repeated propositions. Maybe they fixed that. Yeah, they did fix that, thank goodness. And also some spacing errors. You know, these are normal things that we see in translation articles. But the clinical tone is excellent. I always like to point that out when an international article does a good job with the clinical tone, because it's at least twice as hard to get that right. You know, first on the side of the original author in their own language, and then the translator understanding that in their own language, and then it's really three-tiered, and then also doing that well on the English side as well, and you know, making the representation fidelitous. It's a very, very hard thing to do. So when I see an international and translated article that has really, really good clinical tone, you know, I really like to point it out and applaud that, because it's not easy to do. So a comment notes how some of the fine subtleties of this translation are lost. So for example, some of the puns, some of the word use, some of the wordplay only makes sense in the native language, and we sort of miss out on that when it's translated into English. But once again, that's really a perpetual ailment of a lot of translations, something you just got to kind of get over. But the ending here is, I think, satisfying and unexpected. It ends on an escalation of threat notice by the site director right here. But for once, this actually seems very well justified and appropriate. I think most, 9 out of 10 times where you have a notice from the site director at the very end, and particularly when it includes something like, hey, we got to make this a bigger deal, or hey, this is a bigger deal than what we thought it was. Yeah, it's 9 out of 10 times it's really drab, it's really tired, doesn't really do what it wants to do. But this one I think is really well done. So it's not a terribly long article, and it gets really interesting. There's a lot of interesting moments in this. So I would say give it a read for sure. I think 7 is way too low, way too low. I don't know if it should be much higher, but yeah, that's. I would have to say that this is bias. This is Ian bias, I think. So that's a shame. Turn down the volume just a wee bit on that. There we go. Okay, what's next? SCP CN1109. So this is from the China branch, the modern China branch. Maybe somebody can tell me what the heck's going on with that. But let's get Brian to summarize this for us real quick.
A pataphysical project that can stabilize narratives from pataphysical deletion by author's entities.
Yeah, you heard that right. So it's pataphysical. So, buckle your seatbelt. Like a lot of pataphysical articles, this anomaly is essentially a pataphysical technique. It's essentially a pataphysical enterprise or project or procedure, if you will. This is sort of, for some reason, something that keeps popping up over and over again in pataphysics. So it's a little tiring to see, but let's actually walk through this, because this is a really interesting article. It's very interestingly designed. The architecture of this, sort of the psychological architecture of this is very interesting, and it's actually done very well for itself. I think this really shot out of the gate at about +20 when it was released. And some of that is, don't know if you've noticed, but I have, because I'm reading all of these, a lot of the translation articles, particularly the ones that have really, really bad broken English, will be upvoted very, very quickly out of the gate by people from that branch who want very badly to have more representation on EN. And so you'll see an article that's just cancerous with issues and errors, and you'll wonder why in the world it is even in the positives. And if you happen to check who upvoted it, it's unfortunately it's a lot of people just basically bandwagoning and Homerism sort of upvotes, and so that's a shame, because it should be about the quality. It shouldn't be about Homerism, but that's something that I do want to bring out here for a second, which is just that this is definitely a tangent. But basically what this amounts to is, international community members sort of gaming the upvote system to get these articles on, when they clearly would not be if they were not backed by an international sort of boost. And so that's one thing to notice. But the other thing to notice is just how easy it can be to game the rating system at SCP. It's very easy to game. And if you think that this is only being done by the international branches, you should think again. So, because at least they're showing you that it can be done. That's at least what they're showing by doing this. But this one actually, I think, got a lot of good attention. Once again, the initial burst out of the gate slowed down because I think a lot of people from the Chinese branch were upvoting this. And it has picked up about 20 upvotes since that initial burst coming out of the gate. So, I mean, it's more highly rated than your typical international article. And unfortunately, I think it's actually way too overrated. So, but let's kind of go through this together. So first, we have a simple splash screen, and this is an access link. And if you click this, it transitions into an impressive bit of immersive terminal-like work. There's this really brilliant piece of code here that will not let you access the document until you log in to Wikidot. So as you can see right now, I'm logged out of Wikidot. If I try to go in, it actually sends me to to this to log in. So let me see if I can do this real quick. I'm not gonna be able to do this. Let's see. Oh, I know what I did wrong. 1 second. Okay, there you go. So let's see. Unfortunately, it's kicked me out. Let's see if I can just go back though. So now let me show you what it's like if you're logged in. So you hit this impressive display comes up, and then it already has your ID and some password typed in. And then you can actually access the document. But look at that great animation. Obviously, it shows the pataphysics logo and also, but it sets so nicely into the page. Did you see that? I kind of want to go back and do that one more time, just because it sets itself so nicely into the page. This is, I think, an elegance in CSS design that we don't see on the EN. I think EN is more it's more the equivalent of pop music that's just hyper compressed. Doesn't really have a lot of dynamic range and the elegance that can come with that. It's all just turned up to 10, turned up to 11, a wall of sound sort of CSS to try to basically get the attention of people whose attention spans are the sort of thing that would be convinced and wooed by something like that. But this is just there's just some fine touches of this. I know it's not something I usually like to praise, but it's just hard to miss. It's just beautiful how that happens. And of course, as you scroll down, that icon of the pataphysical logo stays in place. I think it looks as good on mobile, which is its own accomplishment. So this I thought was pretty cool for pataphysics and for gimmicks and for CSS gimmicks on the wiki. It's the sort of leaning on the fourth wall by design. But I do think the immersion of this is a singing triumph. I think that it's just so cool that they found a way to make you log in. I also think that's a shame because obviously if you don't have an account, you can't read this article. So there's obviously a little bit of a trade-off. And I certainly think that the author is already making the worst of the decisions in order to be flashy. So that's something I think we'll see continue, but let's get into that. So signing in makes the pataphysics, as we saw, explicit with the phrase and the logo. And I'll also say I think the layout here is so damn good too. So just very simple. Obviously you have over here and over here. No need for ACS, no need for a big old table telling you who the site directors are. This is a very classy sort of improvement on just the classic format. This is really a tasteful way to, I think, progress that. So good job to this author. Okay, so having said that, I think that's where the strengths of this article stop. The strengths of this article are its looks. It's got all the flourish and the flash of something like SCP-6747, while avoiding some of the more dramatic, sort of like fractal background and neon colors meant for children attention spans. It's just nicely executed, like I said. But I think that's basically where the good parts of this stop, which is a shame because that's all visual. And now once we get into the actual writing component of it, it definitely does not keep up in my opinion. So the containment procedures make it clear that this is a narrative hazard. We probably could have guessed that just because this is dealing with pataphysics. There's an unfortunately dead crosslink right here. If you go to that, and I think this because the coding is specific to the Chinese branch. I think obviously that would have worked if you were actually on the Chinese branch. So that's one of those things that gets lost in translation. It's just unfortunate that that's a dead link in basically the second sentence of the article. Another cross link describes one of the more famous pataphysical articles on the EN, which is SCP-3309, and it references something in here called Tapered Spear, right here, Tapered Spear. So once again, also something that we see a lot of in pataphysics is the real strong reliance and casting of past pataphysical articles in order to make the current article work. And so if you didn't know what Tapered Spear was, or if you don't remember, that could be a problem. It could certainly be an impediment to you being able to understand this article. So let me just go back and tell you. Tapered Spear is a pataphysical method to neutralize anomalies by introducing grammatical errors into the documentation. And of course, what's happening pataphysically is that thereby you are invoking the voting class's disdain and downvotes for this article because it has so many things wrong with it. And that's how the anomaly is sub-pataphysically neutralized. Okay, so that's what Tapered Spear is. So once we kind of get through that, we get to the description, and once again, the description is basically the featured project here. So just like we had a Tapered Spear, and obviously the article that this one is taking a lot of notes from, the one here is Project Longinus, and that's also the name of the article, just to kind of fill you in so you don't have to get out the search engines. Longinus is both a 1st century Greek scholar who is concerned with the moral function of literature. That doesn't really have a lot to do with the article like I thought it might when I first looked it up. And it's also the name of the unnamed Roman soldier who supposedly pierced Jesus with a spear while he was on the cross. So Tapered Spear, Longinus, you see how these things tie together. That's basically pretty cute. So pataphysically, in real life, upvotes are represented here as a narrative's subjective stability index. So that we see this all the time. Stability index. The current stability index is plus 42. So that's, once again, another bit of code. So let's say, I can't downvote here because I'm banned, but this portion right here of the article is the actual upvote. So upvotes are cast into this article pataphysically. So, maybe you think that's cool. It certainly does tie into Tapered Spear in some way. But yeah, so there's that. And then another device is introduced that is essentially the locking of a page on the wiki, let's say by administration. And the idea is that when you lock the page, you stabilize it. And as we know, an article is prevented from being deleted even if it goes into the deletion range if it is given this protected status. And so that's really what this article runs with. So it kind of takes this action, this in real life action of us sitting behind a computer locking a page in the wiki as a sort of sub-pataphysical method of ensuring stability for narratives. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Perhaps expectedly, we get a lot more crosslinks to sort of necessary components of understanding for this article. We get, as you can see, the Swan's proposal, which is here. We get another crosslink to Kate McTierris's 001, which is also here. And by the way, these 001s are superior examples of pataphysics because they're not explicit. They don't explicitly tell you that this is pataphysics. That's not always 100% reliable of a rule, more of a guideline, but most of the time that's going to direct you very very reliably when it comes to, just very a heuristic for deciding whether or not this is going to be good. But there's actually more. So Min-Min's 2747 is here. The Pointer article that you might know of. Operation Overmeta, which is written by Rimple, and I think was sort of originative to pataphysics in some ways on the SCP Wiki. There's also a cross-link to the SCP Wiki tag page for author. And there it is right there. So if you click that one, it takes you to the actual author. I can't see it because I'm banned. Not missing much. It's just basically the tag page for authors. So it's everybody's author page. So they're sort of like these Saint Swan entities. So you can see there's a lot of play going on. There's a lot of dependency in this sort of nexus. It's sort of like a weave of support from all these past, heavy hitters in pataphysics. And it really, I wish it was just kind of casually doing this, but it actually uses these things centrally. It has to put these elements in here in order to explain itself well. So that's a shame. I think that it would be obviously better to be self-sufficient. We don't really get that here. We get a lot of reliance on other people's past pataphysical sort of heavy hitters here. So I want to thank you for joining us. By the way, if you're just joining us, we did start an hour early, and I do apologize about that, but the time window opened up, and it's been a long week. I've been traveling. I've got to get some sleep. So we did start this about an hour early, but as soon as this is over with, it will be up on the Twitch and on the YouTube, and you can just check out what you missed. We did see some good articles so far. I think this has been a down week for the SCP Wiki. I think most of the articles are pretty poor. But we do have a few good ones. The first one we looked at was excellent, and that was, I think, a Chinese article. So, as this one is too, this is a Chinese article here. So, all right. So once again, we get a lot of these cross links. And then in addition, so the common pitfalls of pataphysics are too strong of reliance on past pataphysical articles, which are basically vocabulary. They're basically stand-ins for vocabulary, such that if you don't know about this article that's being linked to, it's like not understanding a word in a sentence. And once you don't understand a word in a sentence, I mean, context maybe, but you're probably not getting the sentence. It certainly is going to be an impediment for understanding that. So it's the over-reliance on pre-established pataphysical vocabulary terms in the forms of articles. It's self-aggrandizement as pataphysics. It is referring to itself as an anomaly. So, for example, Project Longinus or Project Tapered Spear, Procedure Tapered Spears. It's really navel-gazing in those ways. It really regards its own activity as the anomaly, which is a little cloistered. It doesn't really reach very far out of its own mythos, which is not ideal. So I think a lot of the and then the last one is jargon. The last one is sort of the technobabble equivalent to pataphysics. And so all of these things are typical pitfalls that authors of pataphysics get into. It causes a lot of issues, and it's very, very hard to do pataphysics while avoiding those things. And it's easier to make those pitfalls the more explicit you get with your pataphysics, with dealing with your pataphysics. So this article is obviously incredibly explicit about its dealing in pataphysics. And in my opinion, it succumbs to all of those pitfalls rather quickly, actually. So once again, the code here is very, very impressive. And let's actually move on. So we get through a lot of jargon here. We get to finally enact the pataphysical procedure. So what this does is, if we go down procedure Passover here, which is, I guess, another name that's being thrown up. But you click that, and it takes the reader to another offset that really, in an immodest display, in my opinion, uses this whole I'm pointing at you through the fourth wall, user of Wikidot kind of thing. And it even uses your profile picture, which could get really stupid depending upon what your profile picture is, obviously. And it happens pretty quickly too. So anyway, it really, it doesn't really so much lean on the fourth wall. It doesn't really poke the fourth wall as much as it just completely reduces your personal bubble of space through the fourth wall. This is really, really cliche. This is really trite. This is a very questionable move in a series of questionable moves. Anyway, this page basically tells you that you're a swan entity and that you're the target of this procedure or whatever. So, I mean, it's supposed to be some sort of like existential mic drop or gotcha, and it kind of keeps doing that. So, once again, it's very impressive, coding-wise, to get that to come up. I don't know if you noticed, but once you go to this offset, it's sort of these boxes sort of appear, sequentially in, predetermined time. So obviously the code is very, very impressive. The code, I think, is easily the best part of this article. I just think that, unfortunately, nothing to do with the writing is actually good in this article, and that's a shame for something that's supposed to be about writing. But yeah, so we're basically here. We're suddenly in something that's akin to a messenger system, receiving messages from what is this primary researcher of this pataphysical contraption and procedure. And without giving away too much, it basically decides that you're this swan entity. But yeah, and then this is an interesting bit too, though. We gotta give props where we can, because I don't think I've seen this before. This line right here is basically the equivalent of Metal Gear Solid, Psycho Mantis reading your PlayStation memory. It says, "Oh, it seems that you haven't used anything to post on the wiki," and of course it says that for me because I'm banned. But if you log in, I'm sure it would say something a little different here. So that's pretty cool. It's a neat trick. Once again, it's a trick. And then if you accept and continue, the structure of the article cycles back to the beginning, and acting as sort of this cyclical and very fractal-like imagery that is associated with pataphysics. We see this all the time in pataphysics, actually. Another good example is Placeholders 001 does this same sort of architectural circle. Like I said, this actually went down a vote since I've been here. Hope it wasn't you. I could get banned for inciting a riot, inciting a downvote raid. Not really, not popular enough for that, thank goodness. And I'm already banned. But so the issues, I think, in this article are once again the same that are the common pitfalls of pataphysics. There's an excessive recasting of mundane IRL actions as if they are complex. For example, locking a page in the wiki, when truly they're not at all. And it's just pataphysics trying to make way too much out of way too little. It also, once again, has the inherent problem of dealing with such mundane concepts that it feels the need to make itself overly complicated in compensation. And so once again, that's what we see here. So the act of an administrator locking a page on a wiki has to be decorated in the most ornamental prose possible and the most conceptual jewelry that you can throw on this thing. You get lecture-like passages that gesture to the audience how the terms work, and how this is deep. So if you have to wave at the audience very directly like that, you really spoiled the read. You've spoiled the game. Passages that flail in terms of any grippable intelligence or substance, they're all over the place. I wish I could get actually back to the... Man, I wish I could get actually back. See, I can't even get into the dang thing. Let me try this so I can show you one of these passages. Let's just try to go back out. Go back out. Go back in. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so yeah, there's basically passages that don't make any sense. That you can tell that they're trying very, very hard to make sense, but they don't. So here's a good example right here. The Shining One passive probe is an improved model of the old Omega type detection device. Whatever, that's not Omega, but After a swan object interacts with the Project Longinus system, the probe will be activated and obtain the metaphysical imprint coordinate of the object, then retrieving SCP narratives that match the object. So this is obviously describing what happens to you as you go through the offsets, but I mean, it's once again, it's trying very, very hard to make something that's very mundane very, very complicated. Here's another example as well. Inject the anti-narrative concept, and of course that's a cross-link to a previous pataphysical article. Looks like it's Minmin's 2747. Inject the anti-narrative concept to SCP narrative blocks with the abstract metaphysical structure injector in order that its narreme interdependence collapses and causes echelon effect, neutralizing designated anomalous items on the current narrative plane. Like, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. It's trying very, very hard to sound complex when it's not saying anything at all. You know, and that's easy to spot out. You know, if you can kind of smell that, and then your brain can tell you, oh no, it's not a bad smell. It's not a bad smell. Like it's a smart smell. You know, but something about your gut and your body is like, okay, this is a stinky, stinky smell. And you get people whose brains convince them that this is a good smell. You know, what I mean here is there's nothing really being said. You know, you have people's frontal cortexes are doing gymnastics to make this deep so that they can feel smart by being in on it too. But there's nothing actually being said here. It's also no coincidence that there are so many embellishments going on here in the pataphysics CSS treatment on the whole. You know, why is it that the one school of compositional thought, pataphysics, that tries harder than anything else to be really high concept, high abstract, super intelligent thinking, why is it that one also has the flashiest CSS themes? I don't think that's a coincidence. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. The anomaly is thin. That's another reason why this is bad writing. It's because the anomaly is incredibly thin. Like so many other pataphysics articles, it's literally just itself. You know, the article, the anomaly is itself. It is Project Longinus, right? The article is basically just a placeholder for the idea of an anomaly, and it fills itself the second it's written. We see a similar posture by the Foundation in this as other pataphysical enterprises, the use of a technique or a tool as a weapon or as a procedure, like we talked about. Now, there's value, I think, in mining different possible points of the pataphysical framework. Like, for example, I'd like to see a narrative set pataphysically from the perspective of an article in the process of being downvoted and deleted. Kind of like what you'd get if you wrote a narrative about, you know, the Titanic sinking and people like that. That's what I'd like to see. That's an interesting way of sort of mining things from a pataphysical framework. But, you know, it's still best to try to couch them into characters or a narrative. Otherwise, it comes off as a hyperfixation of the own authors as deities for their own sake. And once again, this is why so many cross-links are used here. Each article represents a function of the author or site member that has been pataphysicalized. The issue is that there's a terminal interdependence that requires either dramatic familiarity with the components or a semester's syllabus of catch-up reading. And if you don't, you're left with just a wall of sound, a lot of convoluted scientific tone with zero content. In fact, even if you understand these things, you're still left with a wall of sound and jargon. You kind of get the feeling that this article isn't its own property, as if it's an empty space that other concepts have rented out. Aside from a guided walking tour of pataphysics' greatest hits, this article amounts to a code novelty. It lacks all the originality and impact of the cross-links that it uses, in taking itself entirely too seriously in the process. Probably the worst direction you can take pataphysics in, as we're denied the charm of the sort of self-awareness that's in the other direction, you know, when pataphysics is addressed as a theatrical play, as it was in Routerhouse's recent article, that SCP, I think it was 6456. So instead of that fun, we're replaced by this insistence from the article that we take it seriously and that it is super duper, plus smart. So the result of all of these common pitfalls is, I think, a very pungent impression of pseudo-intelligence. It's the kind of stuff that the stereotypical philosopher sits around, ruminating upon. In this article, it gets more explicit and less timid than in other attempts to sell the content as profound. So, for example, this one right here, without footprints left, has a traveler really crossed the jungle? without being told, has a story really been written? Once the project is completed, yeah. So it's like, okay, you're basically saying if a tree falls in, that trite thing, if a tree falls, whatever, there's no one's around to hear it. Does it hear it? That's what this is. So we've only risen to the level of just like absolutely stereotypically trite pseudo-philosophizing. That's really all it can do, I think. So, yeah, in my opinion, this looks fantastic. I mean, I'll give this all the credit in the world. This is some of the most impressive code I've seen. I think this looks way better than other, just like high grandiloquent stretching reaches and attempts to make certain articles look really, really good, like SCP-6747. I think this looks way better than that, just because it's tight, it's simple, but it's very, aesthetically engaging. So I'll give this all the credit in the world for its code and for its aesthetics. But compositionally, there's absolutely no substance to this. It's a featherweight. If it's going to impress you, it's going to have to do it through its gimmicks, which it did. It impressed me through its gimmicks. But that really only goes so far. It's like eating a bunch of sugar. I mean, you're going to be hungry an hour later. That's kind of what this is. There's no real substance to this. There's nothing to really satiate that side of us that wants to read because we're writers, because we're readers. This article aims to satiate that side of us that is sitting down watching a video game or TV. So I think it's a little out of place here, honestly. And then I think worst of all, it reinforces the reputation of pataphysics as a bad joke, as sort of a smoke and mirrors magic trick show with any content sort of being paddled with the jingling of the CSS keys, encouraging the meme, pad A physics, not pada, but PADA, pataphysics. It reinforces that. It also reinforces that all these things are sufficient to convince the palate of the voting demographic, because this is, obviously got a decent rating here. So I think it's just a terrible, unfortunate thing to see. I will say this, though. Despite the dense technical content here, the translator did a fantastic job of maintaining a sleek clinical tone here. So once again, I always want to point that out. If you've got a translation article and the clinical tone is good, that is a tremendous triumph. It's way, way harder to do that than you or I writing good clinical tone. Okay, so I would recommend you do this, even though I don't like this article, because it's just fantastic. Like, it almost reminds me of one of those like rides that you go onto, like at Six Flags, where you're kind of in that lazy boat, and it's kind of a river, but you're kind of just looking around. It's sort of like a guided tour, just in a little boat. That's nice and pleasant. That's kind of what this is. And like I said, the coding is just completely impressive. I don't think anyone. It's very rare, I think, to see someone, let's say on the English side of the wiki, do something this just pristine. It's just very impressive. So if only for that, I wouldn't give it an upvote myself, but I do encourage you to go to look at this, because it's unlike anything you've seen. I can guarantee that. And I would be interested to see if this does the same thing for you, or if it, like Metal Gear Solid 2 Psycho Mantis, tells you the things that you've done on the SCP Wiki. That would be pretty cool. All right, maybe just a couple here, and we'll take our little intermission where I can get maybe something good to drink for a second. We'll skip one that was deleted. This was a 001 proposal from another international translation. We'll skip that one since it has been deleted since being posted, and I think that's probably a good thing. I don't think that that was a good one. Okay, so let's talk about this one. This is SCP-6723, and I'm going to get Brian to read this. It's only a sentence. Tell us a little bit about what this article is, Brian.
A child's cadaver that doesn't decay.
A child's cadaver that doesn't decay. Okay, so as you look at this article, you can automatically tell instantly that the way this is presented is unique and compelling. So basically what we're looking at here as it is presented is a researcher's pocketbook notes. It addresses this infamously hard thing to do, which is, an article as a work in progress. But it does this, I think, very, very well. It avoids the melodrama of the researcher's internal monologue that they do for their own work for some reason. It'd be like if you were typing an SCP Wiki draft in your sandbox and you put your own commentary, your own thoughts in the middle of the paragraphs. It usually doesn't work very well. But this way the author goes about injecting this sort of work in progress sort of framing device. It's really unique, I think, and it's really, really well done. The notes here, that are dated, all these notes, I think they're very believable. They have these sort of puppyish, cute abbreviations going on that I think conveys a nice realism. Just a very subtle thing to see, nice attention to detail there. And then as you go through these little notes, you see, once again, sort of cute, puppyish kind of stuff, like this, line is struck through. Oh, I accidentally wrote that down incorrectly in my notebook. And then another one here, and, another one there. And so the strange thing about this article, and this is really a wonderful sort of, it has to do with the rhythm and the pacing of the work, but it also has to do with the panning of sort of a background, very, very far, a mixed sort of tone or cluster of notes that sort of just very gradually increases in volume, not centrally, but on the periphery, on two sides. Because as you read this, you start to realize that something's not quite right about this individual's processing ability. And these little, what were once cute little errors, they become a little more concerning and a little more concerning. They get a lot more frequent. They're just all over the place. And this really mimics the psychological state of this in-universe character of the researcher, and really into one-to-one fashion. It mirrors it very, very well. So I think this is one of the only times that I've seen strike-throughs used very well. The typical strike-through play is, in the containment procedures, let's say, where it's if you want to test this, if you want to do some testing on this, just talk to the site researcher, or the level 4, whatever. And then, of course, that's struck through as if it was super duper dramatic. You're not supposed to, you can't test these anymore because something happened. That's usually how you see a strike through. Terribly unoriginal and ineffective, but I think this use of strike through is really clever. Like I said, it may be the only time, especially recently, that I've seen someone actually use strike throughs really, really well. So the anomaly here is sufficiently interesting. Like Brian said, it's a sort of a child's corpse that doesn't quite decay. So it's interesting in a morbid kind of way. It's poignant, and it's just really unsettling, in just a very few number of words, which is always a good thing for your main ingredient of an anomaly to work with. And so I think another great thing about this read, which obviously if you haven't figured out, I recommend this read by now, is that it's an excellent glimpse into the professional mind of a Foundation researcher and sort of the everyday of that researcher, but also the nuance and the care that goes into assessing a given anomaly. So I think in reading how smart this character is, it actually doubles as the author coming off as very smart as well. The attention to detail here, for example, I love these sections on the pros and the cons of doing these various things. Just that sort of depth, the potential tests, the treatments, they're even sort of horrendously cold but not cruel, So it's just a very, very pitch perfect hit of what it might be like to have to think like a Foundation researcher. I think that's probably the most understated portion of this article that makes it just outstanding to me. The whole thing thematically also is a commentary on isolation, on loneliness. There's this researcher here who's been demoted and relocated. They're having to work by themselves in this. So that really is something that's struggled with all throughout. It really is a constant tone throughout that. And of course, that's kind of scary. There's some really, really great organic sentences. Once again, just effortlessly conveying how these people's daily lives would be baked into their work. Like, for example, this line right here, which says, I'm curious as to whether there may have been someone in her life on our side of the veil. I just love that phrase. I just haven't seen that before. I think that's just really, really cool. Small stuff like this. I think the only shortcoming of this article is the pacing and towards the end. Towards the middle, really, and the rising action, it feels a little prolonged, like there's some sort of arrhythmia or a lag or like a CD-ROM kind of skip into which should be a more seamless progression. it drags on for just a little too long, I think. And also at the end, there's an autopsy that's finally performed, and it's clear enough. I don't want to ruin the article, but it's clear enough from the autopsy, what has happened. Some portions of someone have turned to glass, but how this ties back into the anomaly and why it's there, I think, is not clear enough. Maybe there is no why. Maybe it's just a stylistic decision. But I don't think it connects very strongly or well with the rest of the article as much as it could have. So let me log out here because I think it would be nice to check out someone. Anytime somebody does some really good crit, I'm a huge fan of seeing people do really, really good crits. So I want to read this one. This is Dicedron, who's an excellent, excellent author, really up and coming, I think. I'm very excited to watch Dicedron. And it turns out Dicedron is also a really good critic. So let's read what they have to say here. There's a dreamlike quality to this which works well. The amputated hand, the nonchalant parents, the lack of context around this Derek character. It pairs well with the core of the story, in which we don't need to know the why of many things. The format screw is novel. I can't recall seeing an article like this before. It's a very appropriate way of denoting the progression of both the researcher into the anomaly and of the degradation. I found the whole thing rather anxiety-inducing. So yeah, this I think was one of the better ones of the week, honestly, 6723. Really, really good. So definitely recommend that one. Okay, so we'll do one more for now, and then we'll take our little intermission. This was another article that I thought about not covering because it had a lower score than this when I first came across it. So right out of the gate about a week ago, it was pretty low. I think it was like -6, -5. So I'm always looking to shave off time because I'm a busy guy. And so I thought about not doing this, but I ended up doing it, and it looks like it's improved a little bit. So we'll see. But let's get, first of all, our big buddy Brian to tell us about what this is.
A biblical horseman of death, in a world where broken God/Maxwellism is the primary religion. Thanks to Lord Xvn for the summary.
Yeah, so not to go too much on a tangent, but I just told you that I really love reading good crit left on these articles, and the author and user that goes by the name Lord XVN or something like that, I'm probably one of my favorite critters right now, just because the things that they leave on these articles are just like, wow, like I wish I could have done that. So yeah, so as Brian tells us, this is sort of like it kind of takes the Broken God GOI and mythos and sort of meshes that with sort of a Christian sort of revelation sort of tone and tonality throughout the whole thing. You've got towards the end sort of these horsemen-like figures that kind of impinge upon the narrative here. So, but just looking at it real quick, obviously you can see this is a format screw. It's nice and latticed. The design is quite clean. I think it looks rather good. I think that this is a little unfortunate up here on the header where the white sort of bleeds into this pulsating icon behind. I think the pulsating icon is nice. Obviously, it sort of gives you the setting of the Broken God and maybe the Maxwellian, since this looks somewhat like a microchip or something you'd see in a computer. So we also reference a hexagon high command, that of course being the O5 equivalent for the Broken God, complete with O5 level iconography with watermarked things in the back. And then the warning prompt actually here lets us know that we're dealing with non-human forms. There's an esoteric object class here with the designation all over it, FBG, and that stands for Fabricated Blueprints for Guarding. So, as we get down, we see Juan, Zimself, referenced. If you don't know, Juan is sort of the, prime deity of the Maxwellians of the Church of Broken God. So I think, what turned off a lot of people about this is that this effort, this format screw, and this whole let's take the exact form of SCP and just change the letters. That comes off as a little lame, I think, to a lot of people, like a little too try hard. And so that's probably one of the main reasons why this article is where it is. But in my opinion, and I agree with that, by the way, too, especially just coming into the article, it kind of slaps you in the face. But as the anomaly is explained, it kind of picks up a remarkable amount of composure, in my opinion. The clinical tone turns out to be really impressive, really fine-tuned to a sort of technical dogma that the Church of Maxwellism probably would have. The discovery section, I think, is evocative with a premonition sort of guiding the way here. The transcript is given in such an intriguing and textural flair. It's nothing really that I haven't seen before. I don't think this is the first person to put a transcript in sort of a console log, command sort of setting. But I just think it hits the note perfectly. I think it does a really good job here. And I also don't know if I've seen a credentialing system based on percent human body composition. So for example, up here, like if you're over 40% human, and trying to access this document, it's not going to work. So that's very, very Maxwellian. So that's pretty cool. And then there's a little bit of a note at the end. It's given a little bit of a spin in that it's not English. I think this is Hebrew. But I'll go ahead and tell you what the translation is. It translates to, "And here is a pale horse, and sitting upon him his name is Death. The hall went with him, was given to him authority over a quarter of the land to kill with the sword, starvation, death, and animals, the bar of the land." And that is Revelation 6:8. So once again, you get kind of this meshing of the Church of the Broken God and what is clearly a dogma, obviously coming at a dogma at a different angle, angle of approach than what we have in our reality with something like Christianity, but a dogma nonetheless. And so that sort of space, that sort of Venn diagram overlap is sort of played with here, I think, with this article, and it's a very interesting spot to zoom in on. And so I definitely want to give the author some props for that. So, I agree with most people, I think, where you come into this article and it's almost like opening the door to a smell that's not great, and you're just kind of like, ugh. But it turns out to be just like an unfortunate thing at the front door. And if you get into the house, it's actually quite nice in there, even with some good smells. So I think the article actually is way better than its current rating suggests. Seeing some of the articles that pass the test, that actually have positive ratings and that do a lot better than this article, I've seen much, much worse articles survive and live on the site, for a long, long time, much longer than this. So I think this is sort of an interesting thing to see happen, where an article it's written way, 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 way better than some of those other ones that we've looked at together, is not doing well and really is at risk of deletion. But I think ultimately it does come down, if you're going to do something as bold as this with the CSS theme, with basically just hard forking the format into something else, with another GUI involved, I think you're automatically and irrevocably going to get on some people's bad side. I think if this article didn't try to make the risky plays with the visuals, I think it would have a much, much better rating than what it has now. But yeah, textually, literarily, this is far, far superior to at least 10 articles that we've seen in the past month survive on the site. So what's the explanation for that? I don't really know. Like I said, I think it's maybe the visuals coming off a little too strongly here initially. But yeah, so let's, having said that, let's go to the comments, because, it's on these articles that you get some really, really good crit. And once again, Lord XVNV, I'm sure that there's a better, way to pronounce that. I'm sure that's Roman numerals that I'm not doing it. But I just want to read really, really good crit that we come across. So this is Lord. I'll just call them Lord. La, 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 la. And Lord is quickly becoming one of my favorite critics and does a very, very fun job, I think, of expressing himself, even if I disagree with their take. So let's check it out here. I'm going to be honest, Lord says. This didn't work for me. It's possible that that's because I'm not understanding it properly. This is the biblical horseman of death in a world where broken God Maxwellism is the primary religion. But here's why I'm largely not a fan. The anomaly drops us into an alternate universe, which is clear from the beginning, and I would add too clear from the beginning. But then the twist is that something from our world is real in that universe. Here are possible points of weaknesses which contribute to my overall dislike. The world building is atmosphere. There's a lot of world building implied in the background, yet honestly, I can't say much of it feels substantial. There's largely a one-to-one transfer of the Foundation command structures into the Maxwell's Foundation, and it feels like the Foundation with a few names changed instead of a genuine Maxwellian normalcy group. There isn't nearly enough strangeness that makes me feel like this is what the Maxwellists are actually trying to do. And then you can read the rest of this. Goes off about the actual anomaly here. It's just a very, very, very well constructed comment. Just a sniper shot, I think, of a comment for this article. But I do recommend you read this. It's not long. I don't know where you're going to see another article that looks like this. If there's another one that has the pulsating insignia, I haven't seen it. I am not the most, versed on all of the articles on the wiki for sure. But I would encourage you to read this. I mean, maybe, who knows, maybe you like it, maybe you push it up, maybe you don't like it and you push it down and you finally get it off the site. It's kind of in this little limbo right now. So not a comfortable place for any article to be, but kudos to the author for kind of letting it hang, that takes some balls and not a lot of people can do that. So kudos. All right, let's do one more and then we'll take a intermission because we're about halfway through the show. So I think we have enough time to fit this one in, which is kind of a funny one. This is another Chinese translation, and of course it's just an insane number that I don't need to repeat. But basically this is a cat that is abnormally hostile to anything that is long. So obviously this is a joke. You see the image sort of tells you that. It's really kind of tenuous right now. Its rating has gone up and down. It's sort of vacillated a bit. I think it was almost in deletion territory and then kind of came back a little bit. Now it looks like it's about to get back into deletion territory. So, what's going on here? So you can read this on your own. I'm not going to really go through a lot of this, but some very strange things happen. If you try to click on a cross link, it takes you to an actual Chinese document of the site. It may be difficult to understand why this is happening, especially if you don't have translator on right now like I don't. But I'll give you a hint. That's certainly something interesting, even if you don't like this article and even if you don't take anything away from it. If you look down here at the bottom of whatever page has been linked to on the Chinese branch, this page has a rating of negative 1,103, which makes my author page look pretty emasculated in comparison. I can't believe it. But this page literally has, I'm almost afraid to click this because I think it'll freeze the computer, so maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it literally has negative 1,103 downvotes. It's just crazy to see that. So check that out. It's definitely worth a look. It will be deleted, I'm sure, pretty shortly. So, so check that out while you can. And now it seems as though my computer has frozen, trying to amass all of those downvotes. So definitely shouldn't have done that. But anyway, just about the anomaly, a little bit about it. The anomaly is that the site can't be reached. Shit. I think I just broke my computer. There it is again. Here he is. So here's Righteous Tom. So basically this is an inside joke. You really have to understand the ins and outs of the political drama that went on with the Chinese branch in the last year or two. And so obviously this is really a point of disconnect for a lot of people. That's really why this joke doesn't land home. I think this exists on the CN Wiki and has done relatively well. But this has the unfortunate quality of looking a lot like SCP PL-J. Just the timing of this is really, really bad because obviously this happened, a long time ago on the CN. But just coming out of the void, with just a negative presentation, just, naked presentation here, it looks like another cat attempt of a J, which is just not good at all. It doesn't really have anything to do with that. But that's just unfortunate timing for this person, for this author. I think the anomaly here is charming enough to encourage a read. Is it charming enough for a laugh? Like what we would expect out of a J? I don't think so. I don't know. But the experience of suddenly, there's all kind of stuff that's going in here. Like the standard plonk procedure is interesting. Obviously, it has to do with length, with certain metrics of length. But basically, the story behind this is that there's a Chinese master admin who removed several SCPs without the permission of the deletion guide rules. sort of like their version of Kondraki, if you know anything about the SCP Wiki's history and political drama history. It's sort of like that. It happened on the sea, and this admin decided to delete a bunch of articles. And so what this links to is a recent guide that was authored by this Chinese branch master admin, and that's why it has so many downvotes, is because everybody doesn't like the guy. So, we have a lot of drama at the SCP and Wiki, but I don't think anybody is as disliked as this guy. So basically, this article is kind of making fun of this guy, this character over on CN. So, take it for what it is. It actually does have a little more substance than something like SCP-PL-J, in that it actually has something to say about something. It's not just a totally randomly removed image. It's sort of disembodied and floating into the SCP Wiki suddenly. But once again, I think some people think that's the charm of something like SCP-PL-J. So I think this unfortunately just doesn't have much of a chance to hit at all. That's kind of what we're seeing happening. So, all right, so we're up through May 7th. We're going through the 13th. We're about halfway through, and that is when I take my break, because as you can tell, my voice is starting to go, and as you can't tell, but I can, my brain starts to go around here too. So we're going to take about a 5 to 7 minute break, and it is 8 o'clock CST right now, so we'll be back probably 8:07, 8:10, something like that, just long enough for me to kind of find a way to get refreshed. So if you like what you've heard so far, hang around. I will be back pretty soon, and we will finish this week, which has been a very busy week, but a good week, I think. So, all right, see you in. Let me get this up here. Oh, there it is, baby. All right, see you in about 10 minutes. Thanks for joining. Oh yeah. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for the break. Very nice. Thanks for joining me tonight. Appreciate that. An unusual night. We usually don't do this on Sunday. Usually do this on Friday nights. But this is a weird week. All right, so welcome back. This is SCP CRP, aka Like a Levers, and this is our weekend Collapsible, a gauntlet-style 3-hour show where we cover all of the SCPs that made it to the wiki in a given week, and we summarize them for you. But we also go a little bit into the details, don't we? Just to talk about it, because that's something I cannot help but do. Having said that, I do love this shit. I love this shit. In fact, you probably aren't going to meet somebody who loves this shit quite as much as I do. So, let's get back into it. Let me share the screen, because we got a lot of work to do. Hard work is happy work. Okay. Here we go. So, moving on to the next one. This is an oddly titled SCP. That is, damn, I can't remember what branch that is. Fuck. Anyway, some international branch. I am sorry. ZH, can't remember it. Anyway, this one has a different title, so it's kind of a format screw out of the gate. But technically, this is SCP ZH024. So let us ask Brian to tell us a little bit about what the heck this article is. Brian.
This is an international SCP that utilizes the Department of Miscommunications framing device to chop up the format, noting that the exclusions are necessary.
Yeah, so at 28, this is done pretty well for itself, I think, in about a week for an international article especially. And you would maybe start to read this and be like, okay, what the hell? Because there's a lot of broken English going on in here. And obviously everything is missing. You know, there's no real format here. Everything has been sort of modified and or removed. And this is the notice that we get in a very alarming burnt orange and yellow text. It says, notice from the Foundation, Department of Miscommunications. The omissions in this document are deliberate exclusion. Please do not modify without permission. And so just from that alone, we can already sort of form an idea of what this article is. It is a nomenclative issue where you can't describe something in particular ways. So it already sort of calls back to something like SCP-4000. We've seen this 1,000 times over since then with things like SCP Integer, for example, and there are obviously others as well. Anything that has green text in it that attributes the Fae, you know, typically we'll see that actually again this week in another article coming up. But there is some broken English in the header. The omissions in this document are deliberate exclusion. I don't know if that really is a deliberate exclusion because it should be exclusions, I think. It should actually be because the omissions is plural. So there's already sort of a broken English thing. And that's kind of what my only issue with this article is that it sort of couches itself in this intent of, you know, omitting things. But at the same time, when you read it, you know, the composition is really sloppy. The clinical tone is really stuttering, you know, and there's a lot of what you might raise your eyebrow at as typos. And so the question becomes for me, you know, is this really intentional? You know, does all this get absolved by this, you know, communication intent here that this is supposed to happen? Excuse me, as I go through puberty live. I don't think it does. I think that actually what we're seeing here is some missteps when it comes to the translation, and these are somewhat being excused by the clever framing device. So the edits in here, they get much worse than this initial, what I would regard to be a typo. In fact, there are portions of this that are in such broken English that I can't really understand what it is trying to say. So whether this is really a nice format screw that does a good job of something, or whether it's sort of an embarrassment and is something to point at, I don't really know. So if these are actual typos, that's a problem. This wouldn't survive other basic, other containment fiction sites. It wouldn't survive RPC. It wouldn't survive Backrooms. It wouldn't survive Liminal Archives. So it's just kind of embarrassing to see up on the SCP Wiki if these are typos. So I'll throw that out there. I do not know. Okay, so I would say that you should read this just because it's very short. We get basically this explanation to where there's this mimetic hazard, some sort of humanoid anomaly that features an info hazard type mimetic effect. In this case, what descriptors you can use are a little more relaxed. That is to say, you can use some ways to describe whatever this entity is without it resulting in bad things. So it does justify the removal of the description well. Obviously, that's might not be something that we would want to include. The next thing we get to are these testing logs, which very flatly renumerate just what we saw in the containment procedures. So, this containment procedures section says, do not entitle with any names, do not give any attributes, do not use any pronouns to refer to, do not describe with any adjectives. And then basically the experiment log goes through each of these one by one to show how it is that they came up with this. But unfortunately, by this point, it really just feels like just repeated information. So it reads like an article written in another language, sort of meat pressed through the most rudimentary and incapable of automatic translators. I think that there's only barely a formed idea here anyway. I think most of it kind of relies on just what is by now sort of a one-note sort of move, which is, a nomenclature sort of hazard that complicates how you can refer to it. And if there's some deeper logic to the broken English, and if these are not typos, I just don't think it's well enough pronounced. I think the entire read comes off as dramatically flawed. And even if we give this that most charitable interpretation with all the potential grammar and the potential syntax errors as thoroughly justified by the internal logic of this mimetic anomaly, it still only plays as the cheap plastic version of SCP-4000, in my opinion. Its testing logs don't really escalate, and the end, which is sort of a modified note at the end thing, comes off as a little edgy and a little cliche, especially because it's bolded and forwarded, and for some reason the in-universe document creators decided to center it and give it a larger text font and bold it and whatever. So it just reads as it comes off as just a little disingenuous to me to what it is claiming to be. But it has been very well received. 28 for an international article like this after a week. Hey, that's pretty good. So I definitely recommend the read just so you can form your own opinions on this. To see how you feel like it deals with itself, if it comes off, if it actually achieves what it's trying to achieve. And it's really super short. So even if you don't like it, it's not a total waste of your time. So, all right, that's that. We'll move on to 6268. 6268. Ah, yes, this one. Ah, yes. Let's just talk about this one straight up. So it looks really, really good. The first thing you see is this, I think this is like a place style CSS, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's just a really well put together CSS theme. I love the dark gray, sort of navy blue background with this hyper cerulean sort of text and accents. It's just a really, really good looking CSS. So it's a well-presented article. First thing we see is that it's neutralized, and I love how it's all just sort of packaged in this table with really no more detail or attention than what would be necessary for a neutralized anomaly. So I really, really enjoy this table format, which keeps everything very concise, very succinct. If you ask yourself, really honestly, how much do you really need to know about a neutralized anomaly? From a practical standpoint, not much. And so that's really what we get here. So I think I haven't seen this a lot. I think this is pretty novel, and I really, really enjoy this. So this is a great foot to start off for, I think, for this article. And then we get to the description, and I think it's a decent hook. especially for being a neutralized anomaly. So it lets us know that this was probably a sapient humanoid anomaly that was capable of some sort of thaumaturgy and was a higher being of some kind. There's a line in here that uses the term liquidated, which of course is not usually reserved for humanoid entities, but instead for monetary assets like liquidating your funds. So either this is a really awkward use of the term, or we are in for a very dramatic neutralization of this person. And then I loved this terminology here, parathanatologists. The footnote tells us that it's the science of parathanatology deals with the ceasing of existence regarding higher beings and life forms. So we've seen this a lot. There's some of the Admonition Hub series that works in this. I don't know if they gave it this name, but I really like this. This is just, I'm a terminology geek, and I think this is really, really cool nomenclature here. Great word construction. All right, so the rest of the document, as you can see, is embedded in a level 4 clearance. This is obviously classified because the first thing that you get to is basically that it is very revealing of a political alliance that might not be expected of the Foundation that is with the Federal Republic of Germany here. So we get this residual reverb of Department Con still happening. In that we see this SCP DECO, which is the Department of Enhanced Containment Operations. I think the explanation of the level here for why it is that you made this level 4 protected is probably a little too redundant, but it's a nice touch, and it's an extra step or two in the way of justifying the classified information. As opposed to the less careful, less thoughtful, just throwing out the information lock on there for dramatic purposes. So, I do appreciate that. It's not a usual step, but I definitely noticed it. I thought that was nice. I also think that the department itself is pretty cool. Pretty cool idea. This Department of Enhanced Containment Operations. It automatically allows for some interesting narrative potential, while avoiding the more trite and cliched attempts at alternative containment seen in something like the, super unconventional, I don't play by the rules, I butt heads with the system sort of trope that is embodied by, other canons in the site. Let's say like Site 43, for example. So this is a nice way to be subversive without being, a little gaudy about it, just in my opinion. Anyway, then we get to the real documentation here. I don't really know why. I still don't really know why, after reading this article, this character, this is a city-state of Wilhelm is yellow. I don't really get that. If there's a reason for that, I don't know it. But once we get to the actual documentation here, it tells us that the anomaly is not neutralized, really, at least not initially, but it's uncontained. So therefore justifying the level 4 lock again, of course. The new procedures here tell us why it is that the Foundation has this political alliance. The anomaly here is essentially an individual who is the current mayor of a city. The containment procedures give us the indication that it might be best categorized as Archon, which is to say that the containment might be possible, but it's not really advised. There are precautions given for it if the anomaly decides to go rogue with respect to this political alliance. So it kind of details, the what ifs, and maybe that's where we start to see some of this liquidation language come into play. I think the description here is where the article really starts finally to take shape, now that we're actually in the true description here. And you can sort of start to feel the engine revving of this article at this point. It turns out that the city is a floating independent city-state, and it's recognized by considerable world powers, including the Global Occult Coalition, West Germany, and the Foundation. So not only that, but the city-state is an anomalously powered weapon. It calls it in here, an Aegean weapon, a massive aerial Aegean weapon right there. So I'll go ahead and kind of parenthesis my own discussion here and say that after reading the article, I don't know if that really comes back into play well enough. It doesn't really get stated explicitly again, and if there's some sort of low-key sort of subtlety hinting at that being a component of the narrative here and the way it's arranged, I'm not too terribly sure that it actually makes that known very well. But for what it's worth, that's pretty cool. It's an anomalously powered weapon. It's a city-state that also floats. It's a floating city. It's sort of like an Elysium. And another interesting thing about it is it's meant for paranormal humanoids. So it's sort of like this independent and free state thing that defies the would-be slavery of the alternative, things like the Foundation or trying to live in the normal world. So that's what I mean when I say this starts to take shape. It really sets the stage for a nice humanitarian message. I can't help but wonder just initially going into this whether the Foundation is okay with this. I mean, given it's a clear violation of their mandate to contain and perceive normalcy, it seems like quite the liability for that. And it almost seems like there's almost this inevitable likelihood that such a state, a floating city-state like this, will attract other anomalous individuals to it and thereby potentially gain leverage geopolitically as it grows. And of course, as that happens, the Foundation would unavoidably have to see this as an increasing potential threat just to their security and to their normalcy. So on that note, really, the article progresses. It really lays out its narrative in an excellent fashion. It's a little realistic in the terms of the geopolitical tension here, but it's also a little bit too hinted at, because if I was wondering whether or not this individual would go rogue and they would have sort of a spoiling of their very pristine geopolitical treaties, that's kind of what happens. And so the article almost, gestures and leans in that direction a little too staunchly, in my opinion, to where when it actually happens, it's really not that big of a surprise. It's almost like, okay, I kind of saw that coming for a little while. But anyway, the next installment here is from the O5 Council. It authorizes the neutralization of this mayor of this floating city-state. And we see the new Department of Enhanced Containment called upon, which obviously we might now understand is a euphemism for a much more unorthodox and specialized initiative, perhaps assassinating people. So once again, I love this flavoring here. It's very political, it's very realistic, and it's rather intelligent too. So I love the way this is laid out. The next pseudo addendum, which I guess is what I would call that here, kind of just hanging out here. The next pseudo addendum is a discussion transcript of high-profile members of this Department of Enhanced Containment Operations. And so, format-wise, the spacing here is pretty generous. There's like several spaces between each line as opposed to the usual one. So, I don't know. That somewhat inflates the scroll bar over here that you might be intimidated by just looking at it, but there's just a lot of empty space in this article. I think it works fine. I just don't know why it's there. Not a big deal. It's not to say this is a short segment, though. It really, as you can see, it's a pretty lengthy transcript. And I think this is really where the article takes its first wrong turn. Not due to the length, but really it's the characterization here. It starts out really fine with respects to the participants, to their dialogue, but it's really the characterization that gives the rest of the article in this section some pretty questionable direction. So, for example, what I'm saying here, first off, you have to have this prolonged insert of political correctness here, where the researchers sort of argue about the correct way to reference the anomalous species that the mayor is, which, in common lore we would call them the Fae. Then the conversation spends the next chunk discussing this new order from the O5 Council up here, which is to once again liquidate the asset. Similar to the political correctness inclusion, this portion seems to be, on some sort of slow mode, like narrative-wise, like the discussion as to why the O5 Council has dictated this sort of command sort of spirals in circles for a few times before attempting to move on. And we get a little more characterization to this floating city-state, which, unfortunately has to read like someone's ignorances to geopolitical realities. What I mean by that is that the city-state is described by these dialogue participants here as being passive and having no weapons. This is a remarkably questionable decision for those people who are living in this city-state, in this universe, where you have the Foundation who wants to contain you on one side, and you have the GOC who might want to kill you on the other side. It just seems like a bad strategy. It seems like a bad time to Obi-Wan Kenobi yourself and put your lightsaber down by not having any weapons whatsoever to your anomalous city-state for anomalous people. So, and yet we're asked to believe by the author here that, what are the most marginalized, what are the most threatened demographic in this universe is willing to disavow all potential weapon defenses. And so this comes off as ill thought out, in my opinion, sort of a shoehorned characterization of this society in order to very artificially set them up as sympathetic, sort of set them up as these do no wrong, hyper advanced, hyper peaceful, emotional spring well sort of people that is bound to convert its potential energy and cash it in as these people you should just feel very sorry for, who are just the good guys, in other words. So it's just a little too unbelievable to me. Like, that needs to be reinforced a little bit with a little more logic than just like, oh, they don't have any weapons because they're peaceful. Like, okay, well, that just seems like a really bad decision. Like, in universe, if you're the guy who runs the city-state and you're surrounded by hostilities, I mean, I think that it's probably not a good idea to do that. But we're asked to believe that by the author in order to set up this characterization here of these components. So I think it's pretty unrealistic, situationally incredible. It stands in sharp contrast to the geopolitical realism that I think the article has as its main strength up until now. So that's my gripe with that. And then really we get further characterization of this mayor of this city-state as kind of a political idiot. There's a discussion that reveals that the citizens of the city-state have been subject to Foundation-instigated violence in the past, and that the Foundation has coordinated with this mayor to enact the covert neutralization of other anomalies in the past. So you have the Foundation injuring your people and trying to kill them, and then the Foundation has come to you in secret and asked you to help them kill other people. And so even in that context, deciding that you're not going to have any weapons, when these people are like right here and they're gunning for you, and then these other people over here are doing the same thing, it just it just unfortunately makes the characters seem pretty dumb, to not understand what could be coming. And again, the article sort of leans very heavily. It's almost like, okay, so this is going to happen, ... and then it takes forever to get there, and then it's not a surprise when it happens at all. So these department participants are likewise sort of imbued with a childlike naivete, believing that they can, for example, covertly assassinate this mayor and maintain a healthy and agreeable political relation with the city-state on the whole. I'm not sure who with, a decent political intelligence would suspect someone like the Foundation, wouldn't suspect someone like the Foundation if their mayor was assassinated, for example, or even suddenly died in a seemingly natural manner. So once again, my whole point going into these weeds is that there's just a lot of assumed stupidity going on with these characters and what they do by their actions and how they stand in order to really make this article work and to make it sort of progress itself. I think also the characterization of the actual individuals suffers the longer the dialogue takes place. There doesn't seem to be a lot of total differentiation between these characters, although we do get some nice philosophical contrast with different people reacting in different ways to the idea of assassinating someone who's been thus far a valuable asset, and really without a lot of explanation as to why they need to kill this person from the O5. You get the feeling that these are the sort of stereotypical hyper-intelligent sort of like Data characters from Star Trek. They speak in a very hyper-formalized manner that suggests, something like that. And it plays a little strangely when you have typos, or would-be typos that kind of show up here and there in this dialogue right here. And additionally, I think the ultimate thing is that their job in this department is, so far as to what happens in this transcript is concerned, is simply outsourcing the O5 Council's request to hire a band of thugs. So basically the O5 Council up here talks to them and says, hey, we need you to kill this mayor of the city. And so the people sit around and have a meeting about it, and what they ultimately decide is that they're going to hire somebody else to do it. So it kind of calls into question why this department exists. If they're basically just going to be called upon to make a phone call to call somebody else, it seems like just kind of playing the part of a middleman. And they even actually mention another time where the Foundation does the same thing with the band of goons who are going to kill this mayor. And it was actually some other department that hired the guys. So it seems as though they're kind of a middleman. They're kind of just a phone line in this treatment that the author gives this, once again, this really, really cool department. I think it has a lot of potential. And it just doesn't seem to live up to that. They're basically asked to be sort of an operator on the phone in here. Let's see. There's some other pretty I think thin attempts at characterization here. This is one right here in footnote 5. It really isn't that necessary to mention this. Just these strange tangents that the author will kind of throw in here that I don't think are really necessary at all. And so anyway, we finally get to the end of the log here. The dialogue sort of just sputters out with almost as if the read is asking for a break, just like the characters are asking to stretch their legs here. They have to get up from doing something dull. So I think also one other note of characterization here. So the interesting philosophical contrasts introduced in this dialogue. So there's one person in this group who's like, I can't believe y'all are wanting to go assassinate this person. There's one person. Everybody else is okay with it. There's one person who's not. And so that's obviously, as a writer, some interesting setup there. That's really, when you have that sort of tension, that allows you to do a lot of cool things with the narrative and with characterization. But at the end of this, basically, this is what it says. This Nettergaard is the individual who is protesting, suddenly killing this guy. So this person was, after several voice complaints, transferred to a telecommunications monitoring office. So basically what the author does with this only character who provides any sort of philosophical or moral contrast to what's happening here is basically just ban them and put them way over there. So it's just a missed opportunity, I think. You could have really had that throughout and be sort of reinforced. And that really gives a nice anchoring point for multiple viewpoints for the reader. It just seems to be something that really isn't very well understood by the author and is sort of thrown away. So instead of something that breaks up the monotony of the echo chamber of these people, you instead get really this one-dimensional sort of politically uninteresting group of people. So I think the author made the incorrect compositional move, essentially getting rid of this lone contrasting voice. So, I mean, the consolation, I think, is you get to see a little bit of the character of these people and that they are so intolerant or unable to tolerate any sort of dissonant voice that they just ban them. So that's its own commentary on those people. That's kind of the consolation. So, and then just continuing the discussion of suboptimal characterization, the foundation itself in this article is really set up as sort of the bad dude enemy, stereotype on steroids. You have them contacting this gang of, thermatologically inclined goons, even when they know that their past employment procedures have been with people like the factory and other unsavory groups of interest. So even this next one, this next little addendum here, you get basically a meeting between the Foundation and this band of goons, and they're meeting in the basement floor of an abandoned railway building in Germany. So it's something you'd see out of like a Hollywood scene about a drug deal. And so the characterization of this attempt is almost instantly like a little tired, a little trite. So anyway, I think as the article moves on, you do get better characterization at times. You get sort of the fulfillment of that lingering suggestion that these participants are themselves somehow like very different, kind of like that Data Star Trek character vibe I was talking about. It's revealed at some point in this next entry that they're phase. They're also phase. So that does introduce, sort of a little complexity emotionally in this act of deciding to assassinate this Mayor Faye, who's sort of like, he should be their hero politically, So I think that's a really nice decision by the author. It really ties a lot of information that was previously sort of felt a little left out, in the article. But yeah, so that was a really, really great moment where we find out that these characters are Fae. But I think the article suffers from some aimlessness on the whole, some excessiveness when it comes to the terminological babble, and like I said, just some missteps in the characterization. There's a lot of footnotes that I feel don't need to be there, and that I think just kind of contribute to the feeling of babble speak. So having said that, the polish on this article is outstanding. The clinical tone is precise, it's talented, it's creative, it's way above average. I do enjoy the introduction of some of that terminology. Like I said before, that first footnote I think was pretty cool. Like I said before, the visuals are real tasteful. The CSS theme is real nice. Here's a good example of some of the technobabble coming in towards the end here. Yeah, so I mean, it's got some things going for it. It's got other things going for it. The reason why I'm going into this for you so much is because it's actually really, really long. This is a really, really long article. It just takes a while to get through. So, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I appreciate the historical tone of this article. It's got a real authentic feel to it. Ultimately, it has, a potentially dry and uninteresting topic, but it just is so highly realistic and technical to me, both in its composition and its subject matter, that I think it captures, in a way that's not usually done very well, sort of the intricacies of, geopolitical, relations and the muddy waters that can exist with the Foundation, and the sort of evils that something like the Foundation has to make pacts with in the course of their operations to get those goals achieved that they want to do. The article's weaknesses, I think, pull it down sufficiently to question, an immediate upvote. But I do recommend this article if you have some time on your hands. Now, having said that, I do want to visit one comment in here. And who do you know? It's Lord VN again, Lord XVN. So I do feel like I'm missing something here. When I reach the end, I tried highlighting the blank space and rereading the initial document to see if I had missed something. I feel as though there isn't enough of a resolution. My biggest question is why the Foundation betrayed their ally, and ultimately I never got an answer, though that may not be my fault for reading closely enough. There's also another comment here that's a little too long for me to read, but I think this one is really good too. And so if you don't end up feeling this article very much, I think that probably someone like Roofhouse here or Lord is going to encapsulate very well what maybe you didn't like about it. I'm kind of in the no vote territory. I'm just so impressed with this article's polish. Like I said, the clinical tone on this is just absolutely stellar. There's some really, really nice moments in here. I think the ending is sort of a dud. Like it sort of just ends very abruptly, almost as if you have some characters who are walking on a backdrop, and suddenly the backdrop goes white, and the characters are kind of like, oh shit, there's the end. But I think ultimately this is an interesting read. But yeah, I would only read it if you have a good amount of time, because it's not super duper unanimously stellar. I think it's got a vote of like +7. So I think it's a little too low for this article, honestly. But, at the same time, I don't think it should be a whole lot higher than that. All right, moving on. SCP-CN 985. What do we got about this? Okay, so immediately on a glance at this article, it's clear that it's going to be taking a lot of cues from early SCP. I mean, you got like redactions in the all over the place. Redactions all over here, date redactions. The interviewer, the doctor is redacted all in the interview here. So kind of looking like a Series 1 kind of thing. It is an international branch. It's Chinese. So maybe it was written a long time ago. We just don't know. Maybe they still kind of write in a Series 1 style over there. I'm not really sure. But it does look like it takes a lot of cues from Series 1. The containment procedures really are also in lockstep with that initial vibe of Series 1. What we have here is a sapient aquatic anomaly that's possibly humanoid. It ends up being a shark, or a nursing shark, I think. And it's sort of in the containment procedures given the good behavior containment cell perk treatment, where if it is a nice anomaly, you can give it things like anomalously waterproof video games and a laptop. So I think the clinical tone in here is okay, but it has a little damage on the edges. There's, for example, like 2 consecutive sentences that start the same way, talking about the water tank, when these could be very clearly joined together. So, the anomaly ends up being a nurse shark. It's sort of decorated with the little trinkets that make it more anthropomorphized, like it has the ability to manipulate its environment, kind of like it would if it had a human hand. It can talk, it can write, it can read. It's kind of basically like a human college student just in a nurse shark form. So, yeah, I think this is a pretty short article, but it kind of feels a lot longer than it is. I think the worst part about this is just, once again, the characterizations. It's very, very tiring to get through this. It's a very plain anomaly. It doesn't really do much to stick out from a crowd of other similar anomalies kind of like this. It really has all the character development of a cartoon nurse shark version of an average college student, something you'd see in like SpongeBob, I guess. And then what's left after that in the article is essentially a cheesy recruitment ad that the Foundation would like to run, and a story about unlikely allies. But it doesn't even get as far as compelling in the story towards any of the potential of those points. And instead, it just feels like a rumination and a bunch of non-action. The character is cheesy beyond stomaching, in my opinion. It's sort of like the Kid Gohan degree of I just want to be big and help too. So ultimately, just based on the overall anomaly concept, the characterization that it's given, the dialogue that it's given, and then of course the progression of things that happen in this article, I can't recommend it. I don't think there's anything really going on here. It's one of these articles that seems very unaware of itself, more of an errant thought towards something interesting than anything actually realized, and it sort of just reperforms in an oblivious fashion some of the most thoughtless and cliched steps in Series 1 style containment fiction, such as a slightly humanitarian angle to the containment procedures like we talked about, and the pointless redaction of the interviewing doctor. Just a very tone-deaf article. Once again, it could have been written a long time ago, so let's give it that. But I think it's sitting at 16. I think honestly this is way, way too generous for this article. I don't really understand what this is doing here. Once again, I mean, do we have a bunch of people voting this who are from the Chinese branch? I don't know, but I think it's just. I think this is just not a very good article. So I would not recommend this article about the nurse shark who, wants to help out the Foundation. All right, now we're going to get to 6455. This article is damn good. I'm going to speed things up here because we're almost out of time. This is a damn good article. This is by Stormbreath. It really kind of details an anomalous serial killer and uses just really, really smart writing. The testimonies here are sort of embedded into the actual article. They're just very, very believable from a characterization standpoint. Very, very well written. It sort of deals like with an anti-memetic person who is enacting serial killings, which is kind of interesting to me because usually when you have an anti-memetic person, the most cliched and tired way of treating that is to make it the victim. So this kind of takes the opposite direction here. So the way that this article is sort of built and slowly cooked and slowly baked, slowly boiled into giving you an idea of what is actually happening is just a fantastic article. It's real high-end stuff. So I cannot recommend this enough. This is probably going to be the recommendation for the week. This is just a very, very, very well-written article by somebody who knows clearly what they're doing. It's not super long here. It's very engaging all the way, and it's just so smart. It just takes you through all of the steps of a Foundation agent who is really, really struggling with trying to figure something out. It's kind of like a little bit of a mystery going on here. But the way that they, for example, disprove some of the theories that are thrown out about this anomaly, they're just super duper smart. And in addition to that, just the way that this is written just comes off as very approachable. And it's just a fantastic article. Stormbreath has really knocked it out of the park. A 66 rating at a week for this is incredibly too low. It's entirely too low for this article. This is probably the best article that I read this week, and maybe the best article that I've read since starting doing this. So definitely check this out. 6455 by Stormbreath is definitely something that I recommend. All right, SCP 6138. So the first thing that my attention is drawn to is this animated logo, which I think is cheap, and of course this like little upward snow thing. I think it's also cheap. This is basically a Dado article that basically casts a Dado fan who is talking to Dado and tries to tell Dado that they want to be like them. And so Dado, in a typical fashion, sort of misinterprets this to be them asking to be made into a clone of Dado. So I want to be you, I want to be like you. Okay, so Dado takes that, of course, very literally. And so we get a lot of shenanigans with that. But the problem with this article, you got some issues with the photos not showing up and stuff like this too. But there's a couple points to note here. This really doesn't know what to do with Dado. It tries to be funny. It does that a couple of times, I think, when it first sort of introduces why Dado is being included here. But the addendum, the observations, basically just detail the things that were already talked about up here. It's basically a transformation of somebody into Dado. And there's really nothing new or interesting here when there could be. This person, Dr. Meg Marvell, ends up being a self-insert, which doesn't help this article out at all. And then towards the end, we get this very strange tonal shift in this article. So this interviewer decides to talk to Dado like Dado speaks, which sort of defeats the purpose. The purpose of Dado is that you're not supposed to understand him, and that's where all the shenanigans come from. But in this this article finds a way for this self-insert researcher to devise a way to speak to Dado to understand it perfectly, and to have Dado understand her perfectly. So that's kind of defeating the purpose of Dado, I think. I mean, the character of Dado has already been killed. We've mentioned it a few times that lately Dado has gone woke in some articles. There's a little bit of wokeism in here too. Like, for example, footnote 9, if you want to go look at that, that is just kind of stinky kind of woke. And the article really forgets Dado. It forgets, why Dado is used, the character of Dado, and the last maybe 3 addenda take a very sharp turn in attempted characterization to focus on this self-insert who basically tries very hard to stand out and be somebody who's big and bad. I don't think it works very well. It's really a pretty dull article. I don't think this is worth your time. It's a very, very long article. So there's a lot to say about this article. I wish I could go into more detail about why it is that I think it's so bad. I think a rating of 8+ is probably too good for this article, honestly. But it is nice to see that it isn't being super duper celebrated. There's a comment in here if you want to go check that out in lieu of me giving you a more detailed discussion right here by Radioactive Rads. They basically do my job for me, so check that out. All right, the next one I'm actually not going to say a lot about. This is SCP-6488, and it is the recent installment in the Admonition Hub. This is a series of articles, and it sort of paints itself as high concept stuff. It describes itself as very intelligent, and so I think that's probably the wrong foot to get off on, and I don't think it actually does what it wants to do. Now, this is an incredibly long article. Now, some of it is space, so like this right here, but that doesn't really help. You get passages like this that you see on the screen. These are essentially minute meetings, meeting minutes from like really dull stuff. The characterization here is completely flat, in my opinion. The characterization twist at the end doesn't work. I saw it coming from a mile away. Maybe not necessarily who it was, but what was going on here. I hate to say this, but this article is one of the worst that I've read. And I know it just seems like I'm trying to be contrarian because this is very well received. I do attribute most of that to the aggressive marketing campaign that this article and most of the Admonition articles undergo well before actually showing up on the site. And I think most people, I can't be sure, but I would hazard a guess to say that most people who really like this are essentially duped by the CSS treatment and by this sort of series' insistence that it is super duper smart. When if you look at it in the way that I look at it, it's not smart at all. So I'll just say this: I don't think this is good. I'm sure you'll read it just because it's got so much marketing behind it. But it certainly didn't live up to the hype, in my opinion, for the amount of hype that it got, that the authors developed for it. And I ultimately think it's a rather terrible article. And it's so bad, and I had so much to say about it, that I'll probably end up writing a blog post about this. It's the commentary that I had about this is almost half the length of this article. It's just not good. If I had to put it down in a sentence or two, I think that basically nothing happens in this article for the first maybe 4/5 of it. You have basically these researchers that are very flat character-wise that end up just sitting around talking about the hyper minutiae philosophically for things of containment proposals and what to do in a situation that they're not sure about what to do in. And of course it has these sort of out of universe sort of fourth wall leaning sort of inserts here of live journal like poetry and discussion kind of interaction stuff. Even the image wants you to think it's really, really smart and cool, It ends up being just a mishmash of pre-existing science fiction pop culture movies. You've got Inception in here. You've got The Matrix in here. You've got Detroit Become Human in here, and even some others too that I know I'm forgetting right now. But so this, you strip it down from all its good-looking CSS, when you strip it down from all its posturing of being very, very intelligent, there's really not a lot going on here. And that happens for most of the article. It was one of the most excruciating things for me to get through. This was very, very painful to read through. And then at the very, very end, it starts to do things. And the things that it does are, I would say, mild. This last part here, I think, is sort of dreamlike in its vibe. But once again, it tries to be smart, but what it's really doing is sort of like bubblegum, sort of like empty calorie, air-filled treats, where these lines in cyan text, for example, they sound like they're trying to be deep and substantive and sort of wow, next level thinking, but they really don't make a lot of sense when you get into it. So anyway, all that to say that this article does nothing for a very long time. It's like driving on a road that's completely straight with nothing to see, and then make some very zigzaggy turns at the end, trying to, I guess, make up for the time that it spent doing a lot of nothing. So I will have a blog post about this article because I think it's a fascinating study to see how much people will overlook when you dangle CSS keys in front of them and distract them with sort of like neon, sort of like children's toy sort of color decisions here. And when you market yourself as super duper intelligent, how many people will just be duped by that? And so the blog post I'm going to make about this article goes through step by step, as to, where this thing is making bad decisions in the composition, the characterization, how that's not really achieving much at all, and how really the twist at the end, it really sort of indicates this very, very early on, a little too evidently, for it to make up for the drudgery that is this completely monotone and flat sequence of people basically just talking to themselves about things that other people would have to be distracted through a lot of CSS to actually find interesting. So I think it's a fascinating study just to see how effective a marketing campaign of this caliber can work on the SCP Wiki, and particularly convince people that what they're reading is smart, is intelligent. When I'll go into the best of my ability to justify in a lot of detail why it is that I don't think this is nearly as intelligent as what it claims to be. In fact, I think that other ones we've read earlier, 6455, for example, is way more intelligent than 6488. And then even some of these other international ones, CN666 I think is way more intelligent than 6488. I just don't think this is a good article. I know that I'm like Mr. Contrarian, and whatever anybody else thinks, I don't think. That's really not what's going on here. I have a tremendous essay on why it is that this article doesn't at all work. It's got some very, very deep flaws. So I mean, if you like this kind of stuff, I'm not trying to take that away from you, but just look for the blog post, lackoflepers.medium.com. That'll probably go up this week or next week. I'm going to be pretty fair to this article. I am going to read it again a second time, just because I want to be really, really sure about putting my neck out there to make such a hot take. But I think this article is significantly worse than most of the ones that I read this week. And I think that it's basically, if I had to put it in one phrase, it's all flavoring packet, no ramen. That's what this article is. All flavoring packet, no ramen. Okay. So look for that. We'll talk about that one. But my opinion of 6488 is not good at all. It's terrible article in my opinion. All right, this one is also something I don't recommend. You can skip it. Actually, it's very, very short, so maybe you want to check it out. It's a Korean translation, and the Korean branch really has done very, very well for itself in this recent slew of international translations. I think they have positioned themselves as my favorite of the international branches to see translations come from very easily. Their articles are, routinely better than I think other branches, but this one is a little odd. Basically, it is a particle physics engine that works in reverse. So it kind of almost flirts with a bit of a pataphysical vibe to where, when something happens wrong with the particle physics generator, it is mimicked in real life. So it goes into that a little bit. There's a little more to it than what I just talked about. It basically deals heavily with organic chemistry. Like if you know what a mole is a quantity. It's how many particles exist in some I guess cubic volume of something. I can't remember my organic chemistry too well at this moment, but so I mean, it's got a cool little flashy image that I don't think contributes a whole lot to anything, but it's short, so check it out. From what I can remember, the translation is pretty good. The clinical tone is pretty polished here for a translation, so check it out just because it's short. I think though that the rating is probably pretty fair for this one. All right, 6137. Wow. So this is basically a nondescript humanoid that has strong anti-memetic properties that people forget very quickly. This is bidirectional, which is the interesting part about this article. So that if the anomaly forgets those people that it's introduced to, those people will suddenly disappear from existence. So the kicker is that when this SCP forgets you, you cease to exist. It's not just the typical anti-memetic thing of, I don't know who you are anymore after meeting you just now. So that's the twist here. It's an interesting kind of variant on what is typically a pretty, pretty common anomalous object setup, played pretty straight. So, I think this is worth a read. I think it's probably a little better than the 13 that it has, but ultimately it does have some flaws. So aside from the interesting portions of this anomaly and this engaging framing device, which is basically that you're not supposed to know anything about this article. You're not supposed to get into this article, really. I think it takes quite a nosedive after the introductory lighting of the fuse. If it wasn't so common to see something that I think is really subpar on the site, at least that's consolated by the fact that this is plus 13. Like I said, it's probably a fair rating for this. I don't think this is a stellar article, but if you are interested in the anomaly, I would warn you that the rest of the article does not live up to how interesting the anomaly starts off with, but maybe read it. It's not terribly long, but certainly is long enough for me to let you know that I read this and I wasn't happy about spending so much time on it. All right, 621 KO. This is another Korean. This one's not that great to me. I think 8 is a fine rating for this. So it's a street lamp and a sign that tells people to give it food so they can run an errand. And it also has a -2 designation that are basically moths that are there to enact that errand. So the anomaly is a little haphazardly thrown together. I don't really understand, after having finished this, what moths have to do with signs. As you go down, it basically tries to pitch this as the moths' home world being overpopulated, and so they're trying to get food and coexist peacefully with, like, the Foundation, for example. But it's just a really poorly executed idea. It's a pretty questionable idea in my opinion too. The anomaly is kind of wonky and doesn't really ever get running quite right. And then the treatment that it receives, particularly the pulling in of another Korean anomaly here, and then just the decisions that this narrative goes in with these ingredients, I think is not great. So it's not terribly long, so maybe you want to read it, but I just don't think this is a great representation of the Korean branch. Yeah, it's literally a stop sign or a lamp that eats your food when you give it to it and does an errand for you if you ask it to. So 6744. Let's see what this one is. Yeah, this one was really nice. I like this one quite a lot. So this is a curse. It's kind of cleverly referred to here as a thaumaturgic interlock that's placed on some upper Foundation personnel that results in minor probability events, which are mild to concerning and potentially harmful to others, but nothing that is terribly fatal. The -1 is a humanoid who you see a picture of here that is kind of decomposed but remains animated. So basically it's a ghost that was killed by some site director's decision making. And so essentially it comes back to haunt that person, and the article kind of takes us through how that is and goes into some incident logs where this ghostly figure appears to that individual, that personnel who made the decision to get this person killed, incidentally, as it were. And it's just a really decent article. I think it strays very dangerously to kind of Hollywood territory, where it's this ghost that shows up and just like jump scares people and like has these glowing yellow eyes and everything like that. So it kind of has this Hollywood sort of directionality to it, but it really does things to I think redeem it from being just the typical Hollywood treatment. Although at the end, the way that it resolves itself, the way that this thing sort of like gets neutralized, because if you'll notice, it is a oh no, it's safe. Sorry. But the way that the anomaly sort of gets resolved in the end is kind of Hollywood-esque, and it's a little cheesy, and it's kind of like okay, like basically the anomaly just wanted an apology, so that's kind of cheesy as hell. But I think it's a good article. It's not terribly long. I think it's really well written. The characterization here, the narrative structuring here, the architecture of the narrative, it's just laser sharp. So the article knows and the author knows exactly what they want to get done, and they go at it very, very intently. And so it's just very pleasant to be very. It's like being in a car with somebody who drives very smoothly and doesn't take any wrong turns or something like that. It's just real nice to be in. So 6744, I would definitely recommend you check that out. I think 23 is quite low for this, for the quality of this. 6764. Oh boy. This is an entity who randomly texts people soliciting help from them via an unknown phone number. And it's basically a ghost. The short of it is that basically this ghost wants other people to die so that it can have friends, because it's, sort of a ghost, and it's a lonely ghost. And so basically the article is, after a little bit of introduction here, just examples of text messages that this anomalous ghost will send through other people's phones and encourage people to kill themselves in different ways. There's also sort of a be careful what you wish for allegory, because the person ends up getting some companionship, but not the kind that they really wanted. So, I try to ignore that this is from Jay Dune. Just full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of Jay Dune. I think that they can do fantastic, fantastic work. But most of Jay Dune stuff, in my opinion, is a little too juvenile. It really tries to be as well. But this one particularly, I have to kind of say that Jay Dune does a really, really good job of balancing what are usually completely unbalanced elements of the writing with J. Dune. So J. Dune, you usually have, these like, they thrive off these punning, verbose, abrasive sorts of writing that they're supposed to have a clear appeal to the youngest tastes of the voting demographic that, not by accident, happen to be the largest and the most upvote rich. And so you have that side of it that doesn't care to be principled in any fashion with respect to like what makes the genre and just the fundamentals of things like that, the basics. And then the other side of J. Dune is that they have an incredibly sharp wit for anomaly selection and really, really great sentence construction and just a very keen awareness of where to take an anomaly in characters and situations. So usually those two elements are warring with one another in a given J. Dune article, to where I'm pretty frustrated because no side is very well represented in harmony with one another. They're usually trying to fight one another. And usually that sort of zany Neo-Law Foundation style of writing for J. Dune wins, and that's usually what kind of the vibe is to one of their articles. So I'll say that in this case, I think this is a perfect balance of those two elements. I think J. Dune hit just the perfect sweet spot of, because just as soon as this article starts to get a little overbaked and you start to think that it's just ridiculous, ridiculous stuff like Neo-Law Foundation, like zaniness and just absolute stupidity, the kind of stuff only a very young teenager would like. As soon as that happens, almost immediately there comes in this counterbalance of just really creepy shit. Like really unspoken, like subtle, like creepy shit. Like, oh hey, I'm in your ceiling fan. Like, I mean, just what? Like, it does a really, really good job. This is the first time I've seen J. Dune like balance this really well. And I think the rating, the one thing to say about this rating and this article is that it's just so non-offensive. There's just absolutely nothing in this article that could be offensive to anybody, with regards to their tastes. I think in that way it plays things very, very safe, and in that way it does cater to sort of the lowest common denominator of reader, and that's why you get such a successful rating like this. But having said that, it also is just very well written. I mean, the character is unique, the character is interesting, the situation that J. Dune puts this character in, those are interesting. How it moves, how the anomaly and the characteristics of the article get somewhere and where it goes are all very satisfying and interesting. And then, like I said, it has a little bit of a message to it. Just be careful what you wish for, kind of stuff. So I think this is a fantastic article. Congratulations to J. Dune for having such a certified banger of a rating at like a week. And if I had to point somebody to a J. Dune article that I think sort of was like the epitome of their style, I think it would be this one. I think they achieve a balance of their typical elements in this article in a way that they've never done before, and it seems like it's worked really, really well. So congratulations. All right, 6235. This is a very strange article. It's sort of lean. There's not a description is one of the first things you might notice here. Instead of a description, we get a series of text conversations in collapsible form. This is a little confused, I think, structurally, because it says Addendum 1 as a header, and then has conversations 1 through 5, and then it has an addendum as 6. So I'm not sure what's going on there with the naming. But yeah, so basically this is an anomaly that is somewhat text and document based. So basically there's a lot of wonky stuff that's going on with the documentation. They can't figure out where a lot of the inclusions are coming from. They don't understand why the description has been removed. And so it's really conversations between Foundation personnel trying to figure this out. And they slowly sort of piece together what could be happening here. And then at the end, the last addendum is actually the anomaly speaking through its own documentation to the researchers as sort of making everything that was bubbling and building up explicit. So I certainly think you should go read this article. It's short. It's very unique. I think it pulls off not having a description, which is not easy to do. A lot of really, really talented authors have tried that in the past and not done a great job. So I think this one does a fairly good job. Once again, there's some comments here that I think you should check out. Word is a hard thing to say. Word. After the first conversation, I was refreshing the page, wondering why nothing happened. It took me time to realize I'm ruined by format screws. So that's the only thing about this article, is that it seems to sort of like suggest some things that don't ever happen. So it kind of sets you up for things that it never delivers on. And so that's one of the critiques I have about it, is that I don't know if it quite pushes what it's trying to do forward thoroughly enough. It doesn't make it that clear. It's really kind of hard to follow, especially if you only have time to give it a read like me once. But yeah, I think the rating is fine. So check it out. It's pretty short, and I think definitely it's worth a read. All right, 6614. Did we just do this one? No, we did not. Let's see, 6614. So this is kind of a strange anomaly. So basically, it's just a series of lunar operations that no one knows about and that the Foundation tries to keep from people. I do think that the CSS looks pretty damn good. I love the dark background with the yellow up here with the yellow accents. That's pretty cool. The ACS still looks terrible. So basically what happens is that you get to addenda, and it basically goes through this sort of like buffet style of different sort of smaller sub anomalies that are all packaged into one bundle. That is this larger anomaly. So it's not really like an entree, like a meal. It's sort of like tapas, or like an appetizer sampler of an anomaly in the article. But each one of these installments goes through different, evidences that are left on the lunar surface. And each one is really clever. I think they're all very interesting. The author clearly has put a lot of creative investment into each one of these. Very imaginative. I think in a couple instances you have these interview logs that don't really maybe need to be there. They're very, very short. The information that's in here could certainly just be put in a paragraph, and so it's just a little strange thing to have, for example, an interview log this short. And something very similar happens here. I think the characterization in this this interview log, which is Dante, is maybe a little questionable. Sort of leaves a bad taste in the mouth, trying to get the character speak of Dante down, and for example, the end here where the interview ends by this Dante character going like, "Oh wait, hey, where are you going? Where are you going?" Like, it's kind of lame, man. Way to end that one. So, anyways, and then this is very interesting. You get to the bottom, and it looks as though you've only read maybe 1/9 of the article, but these are all just kind of like fake links. So it's just supposed to mention and tell the reader that there's a lot more of this kind of stuff happening. But this is a very clever article. I think that it's got an appropriate amount of attention to it for its quality, and I definitely recommend this one. This is a pretty interesting, pretty unique read. We are almost done, just about a handful more. This one is by Bread Tyrant. I hate to ruin that for you, but the only reason I mention that is because Bread Tyrant really started off hot, I think, for a lot of interesting articles, and then the last 2 weeks their entries have been underwhelming. So I certainly hope that they get back to what they've been doing. And then this is strange, the safe has a diacritical on the E. I'm not sure what that's doing there. But this is basically about a anomalous derivative or ancestor or pre-ancestor to Homo sapiens, and it's kind of like a half bear, half man thing, and it's up in the Himalayas. And so basically you get a full description of this, and then supplemented by some journal entries. And of course, the journal entries are incredibly expository and tell you everything that you would ever want to know about the anomaly. I think the voice and the tone of these journals is very, very well done. There's some really interesting action in here that gets pretty gory, but I think is well paced. I think the emotions of the character are very well set into the journal entries. You really do feel like you're there. I think the only complaints that I have about this article are that anything that could be interesting, sort of a curveball in the journals, are reiterations of what already has been told to us up here. So I think that this article could stand to have a little bit of a haircut up top here. Take out some of these descriptive things, at least, kind of give them a little less definitive, a little more ambiguous of a treatment, so that when we get to the journals, these things are impactful. They actually hit, as opposed to, oh yeah, I've already been told that. That's really the only thing about this. I think it's, the anomaly itself is a little uninteresting. It's basically a big scary monster thing. And the way the action escalates, is a little unimaginative. It's basically just saying that there's always a bigger fish in the sea. So yeah, I think this is worth a read for sure. I think 11 is a fair, a decent assessment of this article at about a week. I don't think that this image does much for the article, especially because what you end up imagining this thing to be via the description sort of is tonal odds with what this image tries to represent. So the size comparison is really the only thing you get out of this image, and even that I think is better left undemonstrated and sort of just told to your imagination through these things. So once again, worth a read, not terribly long. I think the journals are obviously the shining point of this, and I think they're good enough to carry the article. So check it out, 6429. All right, moving on, we got another Korean translation here. This one is not good. I don't know when this was written. It feels a lot like Series 1 kind of stuff. It's basically one of these tall T-shaped tower cranes that can move things, one particular thing deep in the earth that I don't think you can see. So the construction of this is a little mysterious. No one's really quite sure what the strings or the cables are connected to. It ends up being demonstrated through some testing that moving whatever is connected to the end of this tower crane has significant ramifications for the entirety of the Earth and its sort of celestial positioning. So, that's kind of where the anomaly is. It's sort of this like, you wouldn't think it, but it's sort of like the universe within the universe kind of thing. I think the article is called "The Heart of the Earth." So that kind of gives you another little idea, a glimpse of what that is. But this is another one of those translation articles that I'm just shocked to see on the site, because there's so many clinical tone errors here. There's so many mistakes of grammar and syntax. I think it was quite poorly translated. And even at 8, I think that, if we're the SCP and we have standards of just basic, particularly objective things, I don't understand what this article is doing here. I hope it's not the case that a bunch of users from this branch have basically padded the reception here to being what it is, even at +8. But I don't recommend this read at all. It's short, but I don't recommend it, so that should tell you something. I just don't think it has anything going on. I don't think it has enough going on. There's a little bit of a story here, but it's not really that interesting. There's like very cheap redactions that are used, both the black boxes and these data expunged and things like this. And just the whole polish of the thing is really rusty. It's just really bad read. Really, really kills it for me. So unfortunately, I do not recommend SCP-188KO. All right, almost done here. As our background music has given up. Not bad background music, it just kind of takes a break when it shouldn't. All right. We already did that one. We must be here. So SCP-6559. This one, oh man, this one is really interesting, by Dodo Devil. It kind of is a pataphysical article. It doesn't really tell you that right up front, but it absolutely does state that explicitly throughout here. The best thing about this article is its atmosphere, which is well established through these series of pictures, I think, and also its sort of unique treatment of pataphysics. So it doesn't get obnoxiously pataphysical, but it does sort of invoke pataphysics as a potential theory to explain what's happening with this anomaly, and then it kind of centralizes that as a role narratively, and then at the end, I think sort of goes broke for a truly Godzilla and Hollywood-like ending that I think really almost casts aside the pataphysical elements that are really developed very well here. And the main thing about this article I think is just such a shame is that it's totally based on another one. Now, it would be worse if this SCP-6247 was Dodo Devils. Thankfully, it's not. Thankfully, it's someone else's article. But it just relies so incredibly heavily on SCP-6247. So SCP-6247 is mentioned in this article way more times than SCP-6559 is. So, I really did like this article. I think it was very, very well argued, I guess. Just well put together, I think, from a lot of ways. There are weaknesses here. I think that, if more treatment had been given as to why this thing is designated as an SCP, as opposed to casting this entire thing as just basically taken on faith. I mean, if you really read the article, they kind of assume that something anomalous is going on, and then at the end, it suddenly becomes very anomalous. You can kind of see this emergency notice thing, which has a cool little background CSS thing going on there. But the article almost shows its cards from its chest unintentionally, because it has this anomaly-shaped hole the whole time, and it never actually justifies what's going on in an anomalous fashion. They just think that it's anomalous. What I mean by that is what's happening is anomalous, but they give it its own designation when, like I said before, it's heavily reliant upon SCP-6247. In fact, once you've read all this, you can easily go back and see that this probably should be just an addendum to SCP-6247. That's about how reliant it is upon that, were it not for the very last thing that happens. And of course, in universe, this is well after the Foundation have decided to cast this as its own SCP. So it sort of has these machining flaws where it just sort of obviously is going to fill itself, in the way that it does, but it doesn't do it very satisfyingly. Like if you've ever seen those GIFs of machine work where something cuts something very exactly, or like inserts something very precisely, like those very oddly satisfying GIFs, that's kind of what this thing tries to set itself up to be, because it leaves what is essentially like a giant crocodile Godzilla-shaped hole in this article, and then when it finally gets to it, it just doesn't fit very well, and it sort of seems like it's forced in there. It doesn't like have that satisfying sort of construction to it. So I think that this article really, its main flaws are highly structural. It's just incredibly over-dependent upon another article to the point of it being egregious. And I think that the themes that are woven through here are a little neglected by the end. I don't think that it's very tight. I think it's a little frayed around the edges, particularly with the pataphysical inclusions here, which try to sort of overarch and subsume everything that happens in this article. But I think by the end, just get left behind. Like I said, I don't really understand how the end has anything to do with pataphysics. So, but I do recommend you read that. That was, despite its structural flaws, Dodo Devil is an excellent writer. Probably one of the best I think that I've seen recently when it comes to just straight up composition. So it's definitely an enjoyable read, and I definitely think you should go check it out. This next one is a nice German joke. As you see here, this is an image of a chicken that has a spigot for a head, and a footnote tells us that, this is a translator's note, tells us that in German, both rooster and tap are the same word, which makes for a nice wordplay and pun. So this is interesting because it's a pun in the German language, but it actually also ends up being a pun in the English language. Because what happens with this little chicken that has a head of a spigot is that anytime it sees another faucet, it tries to go run and mate with it. So it's trying to tap that tap, okay? So you got a chicken, you got a faucet, and you got tapping, like the act of, mating. All in, it's like a triple entendre pun, and it does so translinguistically. It does so like bilingually, so it's just kind of crazy in that regard. I don't know if it meant to do that in English, but I was certainly impressed by that. And it's just a pretty funny article. It's very short. It tried to have an incident report attached to it that didn't do very well. That wasn't very funny. But the actual article is very, very funny. The joke is pretty good. And then besides the joke, the treatment of it is well done. I think the object class thing where they keep like changing it, and you have this corny line from a doctor asking them to stop it, is kind of a bad note to hit things off with. But it really sort of sings by the end. Very, very catchy, very enjoyable sort of joking sort of melody. I think 8 is probably a little too low for this, honestly. I think double that would be about right, because it's just really well done. And once again, that triple entendre, that bilingual triple entendre, is something I've never seen before. So even if you want to ignore that, just stay in the German language. It does a good job with the pun of that too. So check that out. All right, the last two that we have to cover are international ones. This is PL 253. This one is pretty short. Definitely recommend you read it. It is a little structurally confused in that it is not that what is an SCP is not anomalous. It's something else that kind of is on the periphery of the SCP that is actually anomalous, and only that is given a POI designation. So it's a little confused, but if you do go to it, it's real nice and short. It definitely relies incredibly heavily on SCP-4000, as you can tell by this reference right here. And I don't think it does anything really new or special with it. It's a little funny, I think. There's a little bit of humor to be had in this, particularly if you're a fan of the potential ironies that capitalism can create. But it's just so short, and gosh, that's a great picture, isn't it? It makes me hungry. So why don't you go check out this article? I think plus 26 is, it's pretty fair. I think it's probably a little too high. I don't think this article it's just super, super short. It's almost like half of an idea. It's not really cooked all the way, but good enough to stay up for sure. And I definitely recommend you read that. Okay, the last one is another Korean article, SCP-149-KO. I don't think this one really is anything too special, but it certainly is interesting. I love the way that this sort of is meta commentary on things like copyright infringement, and it uses "Are we cool yet?" to sort of make that statement. So what this anomaly is a bird cage made of steel wire, and if you take a picture of it for too long, or if you look at it for too long, if you take a picture of it too many times, or you film it for too long, or you look at it for too long, the phrase "Are we cool yet?" is like permanently imprinted upon whatever it is that is looking at it. So if it's a camera, it's the lens. If it's a human, it's the lens of the eye, and it stays there permanently. In fact, there's a very strange twist to the logic of this anomaly, where if, let's say, a camera is subjected to the effects of this, not only will the camera, everything it takes after that point, always have the phrase "Are we cool yet?" show up on the image, but everything that it has ever taken a picture of, every photo that it ever produced, will suddenly have that on it too. And it's sort of this very, very clever way to couch a deterrent for copyright infringement, for not abiding by something like a Creative Commons license, into an anomaly. And it's not stellar, it's not like bombastic, it's not like super, super cool. I don't even know if it's that memorable, but it really is very clever to read. And so it's very short. I definitely recommend you read it. I think you'll like it. I think anybody who's got a greater awareness of the Creative Commons woes of this space will kind of enjoy this. It's just kind of a nice little treat. So, all right. So that's it. So we will pick it up again next week, as we usually do. That'll start on the 13th of May. This was a really, really busy week. We had some really long articles here, and for me personally, it was quite a busy week. I had quite a lot to do, traveling several days out of this week. But we got it done. It was a long one at 3 hours and 20 minutes. I do appreciate you being here. And, I do recommend you take a look at the Lack of Lepers blog. That is lackoflepers.medium.com. So let me write that down here, lackoflepers.medium.com. Check that out, because in the next week or two, hopefully next week or two, I'll have that thorough review of that new admonition hub article up, just so that I can make my case, because I think it's it's not really, it's kind of pointless just to be like, oh hey, this sucks, this, like, hey, this isn't smart, this is dumb, but I'll go into it. But like I said, just for now, know that it's all flavor packet, no ramen, which is not good, not a good thing. So all right, well, thanks for joining. I really appreciate y'all stopping by on this very unconventional time of the week for us to do this. We will re-enter our usual schedule starting tomorrow. So that's on the Twitch. We do 7:30 p.m. CST. We'll react to just containment fiction media in the space, probably a podcast or something. I'll figure out what we're going to do by tomorrow night, obviously. So I hope you can check that out. I appreciate you being here and participating in and listening to this just tremendous amount of work that is done really with a labor of love, believe it or not. So thank you very much. Have a great night. Thanks for letting me start an hour early. If you missed that first hour, go on back and catch that. We did start about 6:40 p.m. CST, about an hour early, just so I could get done with it early and go to sleep. So that's what I'm going to do now. Appreciate it. This has been SCP CRNP, aka Lack of Lepers, and I will see you soon. Thank you.